I stood at the entrance of the Riverside estate holding my sister's wedding invitation in trembling hands. After 10 years of being erased from my own family, they'd summoned me back not out of love, but because my absence would look bad. The moment I stepped through those grand doors, I heard him. Grant Ashford, my sister's groom, leaning toward his best man with a sneer. The country nobody finally showed up. Bet she borrowed that dress. My sister Lily appeared instantly blocking my path, like I was an unwanted guest crashing her perfect day. Her eyes held nothing but cold embarrassment. "You're here," she hissed. "Just don't make a scene, okay? Don't remind everyone about—" She gestured vaguely at me as if I was a stain she couldn't scrub away. They had no idea that the venue coordinator bowing to the wealthy Ashford family was taking orders from me, that every chandelier, every chair, every champagne flute they'd claim for their perfect wedding belonged to the woman they'd spent a lifetime teaching to feel worthless. What they didn't know was that I'd spent the last 6 years building a hospitality empire in silence, while they dismissed me as their greatest failure. And the groom who just mocked me, he'd done his research just not well enough. Because in the next 72 hours, I would watch their fairy tale wedding collapse. I would expose secrets that would shatter my sister's entire understanding of who she is, and I would make a choice between protecting the family that destroyed me or letting them finally face the consequences of erasing the wrong daughter. Stay with me, because what happens next will prove that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's becoming everything they said you'd never be. My name is Brooke Catherine Kelly, and at 35 years old, I've learned that success looks different when you build it from nothing. I own 3 boutique hotels across the Midwest, each one a property I restored with my own vision and determination, though most people, including my own family, have no idea. For the past 13 years, I've lived a life my family knows nothing about, and that's exactly how I needed it to be. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, slipped between a utilities bill and a furniture catalog, like it was just another piece of mail. But the moment I saw the return address, my childhood hometown, a place I hadn't visited in over a year, my stomach dropped. The envelope was expensive, that thick cream cardstock that whispers old money and careful appearances. My name was printed in formal calligraphy, Ms. Brooke Catherine Kelly. Not Dear Brooke, not We'd love for you to join us. Just my name, like an item on a checklist. I stood in my kitchen sunlight streaming through the windows of the home I'd bought with my own money, and I couldn't bring myself to open it right away. I already knew what it would be. Lily was getting married. My baby sister, who I'd once rocked to sleep and taught to tie her shoes, was 28 now. Old enough to be someone's wife. Old enough, apparently, to have decided I was still worth including on a guest list, even if I wasn't worth a phone call. When I finally slid my finger under the seal, everything was exactly as impersonal as I'd expected. The invitation itself was beautiful. Embossed flowers, elegant script announcing the union of Lily Marie Kelly and Grant William Ashford. The ceremony would be held at the Riverside estate in 8 weeks. My heart stuttered when I saw the venue name, but I kept reading. Immediate family only. It specified, which made the guest list small and the exclusion of me over the years even more pointed. Then I saw the handwritten note tucked inside in my stepmother's unmistakable, perfect cursive. Your presence is expected. It would reflect poorly on the family if you didn't attend. Not, we'd love to see you. Not, Lily wants her sister there. Just a clinical reminder that my absence would be an embarrassment, and my presence was required to maintain appearances. I was being summoned to perform the role of loving family member for an audience, nothing more. I set the invitation on my kitchen counter and stared at it, and that's when the memories started flooding back, the ones I'd spent years trying to bury. I remembered my 8th birthday. I'd been so excited, had circled the date on my little calendar for weeks. But when I came downstairs that morning, the dining room was decorated in pink and white Lily's colors, not mine. The cake said, "Welcome Baby Lily," in sugar flowers. My mother, My stepmother Patricia had explained in that patient voice she used when I was being difficult, "Darling, we're celebrating Lily's arrival. You understand, don't you? You're a big girl now. You don't need all this fuss." Lily wasn't even born yet. My birthday became someone else's celebration before I'd even blown out a single candle. Then there was my high school graduation, the day I'd worked so hard for straight A's despite everything. In the family photo after the ceremony, Patricia had her arms wrapped around 11-year-old Lily, both of them beaming at the camera. I stood at the edge of the frame, my smile stiff, my father's hand barely touching my shoulder, like even that small gesture of affection required too much effort. When I looked at that photo later, I could be cropped out completely, and the picture would look more balanced. I think some part of me understood even then that I was optional in my own family. Christmas mornings were the worst. I learned to stop hoping by the time I was 12. Lily's pile of gifts would tower over mine: designer clothes, expensive electronics, thoughtful presents that showed someone had actually listened to what she wanted. My gifts were practical socks, school supplies, gift cards in round numbers. Nothing that said, "We see you" or "We know you." Just obligations fulfilled, boxes checked. The pattern was so consistent, so quietly devastating, that I'd internalized the message completely. I was the daughter they kept because they had to, not because they wanted to. Love in the Kelly household was a limited resource carefully rationed, and I simply wasn't worth the investment. I walked to my home office and opened the bottom drawer of my desk, pulling out the one photograph I'd kept hidden all these years. My biological mother, Jennifer, holding infant me. We were both smiling, her eyes crinkled with genuine joy, my tiny hand wrapped around her finger. I had only fragments of memory from before she left, the feeling of her hands braiding my hair with such gentleness, a lullaby she used to sing in a voice I could barely recall, and the morning I woke up when I was 5 years old to find her closet completely empty. No one ever explained where she went. Patricia appeared shortly after, and I was told to call her mom, and questions about Jennifer were met with tight-lipped silence, or my father's weary requests to, "Let it go, Brooke. Some things are better left in the past." I'd spent 30 years believing my real mother had simply abandoned me, that I hadn't been enough to make her stay. This photograph was my only evidence that once, even if just for a moment, I had been someone's whole world. I was still holding the photograph, fighting back tears. I'd promised myself I wouldn't cry anymore when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code made my breath catch. My hometown. A place I'd left behind, a place that had never really wanted me anyway. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the answer button, and wondered what fresh wound was about to be reopened. I answered the phone on the 4th ring, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is Brooke. Ms. Hartley." The woman's voice was professionally warm, the kind of practiced friendliness you develop working in hospitality. "This is Melissa Chen from the Riverside Estate. I'm so sorry to call without prior notice, but I'm coordinating the Kelly Ashford wedding scheduled for 8 weeks from Saturday, and I have a few details I need to confirm with the family. Your name is listed as immediate family, and I wanted to verify your meal preferences and +1 status." The Riverside Estate. My chest tightened and I had to sit down. Yes, that's fine," I managed. "I'll be attending with my husband." She continued talking about menu options and seating arrangements, but I barely heard her. 3 months ago, my investment company, Hartley Holdings LLC, had acquired the Riverside Estate as part of a portfolio expansion. It was a beautiful historic property that had been mismanaged for years, and I'd seen its potential immediately. The purchase had been handled entirely through my attorney and business manager. My name appeared nowhere on the public documents, just the LLC registration buried in corporate filings that no one in my family would ever think to search. They'd chosen my venue, my property, and they had absolutely no idea. After I finished the call with Melissa, I sat in my office for a long moment, letting the irony wash over me. Then I started laughing, not with humor, but with the kind of exhausted disbelief that comes from years of being underestimated. I'd left home at 22 with barely $3,000 in savings, a business degree from a state school I'd paid for myself through scholarships and night shifts, and a bone-deep certainty that I would never, ever let anyone make me feel worthless again. My family had made it clear there was no safety net for me, no college funds set aside, no connections offered. When I'd asked my father for help with a security deposit on my first apartment, Patricia had interjected, "Brooke needs to learn to stand on her own 2 feet. We can't enable dependence." So I stood on my own 2 feet. I started at the bottom of the hospitality industry, working the front desk at a budget hotel, taking every extra shift I could get. I learned the business from the ground up: night manager, operations coordinator, assistant director. I was good at it. I understood instinctively what made guests feel welcome, what turned a building into a destination, what separated a good hotel from an unforgettable one. By the time I was 28, I'd saved enough to make my first investment, a small partnership stake in a struggling bed and breakfast that I helped turn profitable. That success led to another and another. I learned to structure purchases through LLCs to keep my personal name separate from my business dealings, to protect my assets and my privacy. My flagship property. The Hartley House was a 1920s historic hotel I'd bought for a fraction of its value and spent 2 years lovingly restoring. It was named after my married name, a deliberate choice to separate my success from the Kelly family name that had only ever brought me pain. I built this empire specifically to prove to myself what my family never believed: that I had value, that I was capable, that I could create something meaningful. But I'd never told them about any of it. I knew with absolute certainty that my success wouldn't earn their respect. It would only breed resentment, comparisons to Lily, accusations that I was showing off or trying to make them look bad. So I kept it quiet, let them believe whatever they wanted about my modest hospitality job, and built my life entirely separate from their judgment. The greatest gift in that life was Daniel. I'd met him 6 years ago at an agricultural trade expo where I was sourcing local sustainable ingredients for the Hartley House restaurant. He was manning his family's booth, talking about heritage grain varieties and regenerative farming practices, with genuine passion dirt still under his fingernails from the morning's work. He had the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and not needing anyone's validation. We'd talked for 2 hours about soil health and farm-to-table partnerships before either of us realized we were attracted to each other. When he asked me to dinner, I said yes without hesitation, the first time in years I'd let myself trust someone new. Daniel came from 4 generations of Hartley family farmers. They owned over 800 acres of prime farmland, held contracts supplying 3 regional restaurant chains and a dozen high-end food distributors, and were so deeply respected in their community that their word carried more weight than any written contract. But Daniel didn't lead with any of that. He led with his work, his values, his hands-on dedication to sustainable agriculture. When I finally brought him home to meet my family 5 years ago, I'd been nervous, but hopeful. Maybe they'd see what I saw: a man of substance, intelligence, and integrity. Instead, they saw only farmer and looked down their noses at him. Patricia's smile had been brittle and dismissive. My father had barely engaged in conversation. Lily, then 23 and absorbed in her own social circle, had treated Daniel like he was invisible. No one asked about his education, his family's standing, or bothered to see past the calluses on his hands. The contempt was so obvious that Daniel pulled me aside before dessert and quietly said, "We can leave whenever you're ready." On the drive home, he'd been thoughtful, not angry. Finally, he'd said, "I don't expose myself to people who don't know how to value what matters. I'll support whatever relationship you want with your family, but I won't attend their functions. I won't smile while they treat you or me like we're beneath them." I'd never loved him more than in that moment. He'd drawn a boundary not out of wounded pride, but out of principle. And he'd meant it. In the 5 years since, Daniel had never once pressured me to reconcile with my family or justified their behavior. He simply built a life with me where I was valued, protected, and loved without conditions. Now, holding Lily's wedding invitation, I made a decision. I would attend. Not to reconcile, not to perform happy family for their benefit, but to observe. I owned the venue. If something felt wrong, I had the ability to intervene in ways they'd never anticipate. And if everything was fine, if Lily was genuinely happy and Grant was a good man, I'd fulfill my appearance obligation and leave quietly. I called the Riverside estate back and booked the owner's suite for the wedding weekend, using my full legal name and professional title. It was a small test. Let's see if anyone notices who I really am. When Daniel came home that evening, I told him about the invitation, about the venue, about my decision to attend. He listened carefully, the way he always did, his steady presence anchoring me. Then I mentioned the groom's name, Grant William Ashford. Daniel went very quiet. The kind of quiet that meant he was thinking, calculating, remembering something important. Finally, he set down his coffee and said, "I need to make a phone call." Daniel stepped out onto our back porch to make his call, and through the window I watched his posture shift from relaxed to alert within seconds. He was talking to someone he trusted, that much was clear from the way he paced one hand, gesturing as he spoke. The conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes. When he came back inside, his expression was carefully neutral, which meant he'd learned something he didn't want to worry me with until he had all the facts. "Tell me," I said simply. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, choosing his words carefully. "I called Marcus, my business partner. You remember him?" I nodded. Marcus handled the distribution side of the Hartley family farm operations, managed their contracts with restaurants and suppliers. About 4 years ago, Marcus was involved in putting together an agricultural investment fund, kind of a portfolio for investors interested in sustainable farming ventures. The financial advisor on the deal was Grant Ashford. My stomach dropped before he even continued. "The deal fell apart," Daniel said quietly. Marcus and the other partners discovered that Grant's firm was inflating asset valuations, making the investments look more profitable than they actually were. Nothing technically illegal, the numbers were presented with enough disclaimers and projections that it stayed on the right side of fraud, but it was deliberately misleading. The kind of thing that makes investors lose money while the advisor collects fees either way. Marcus pulled out, and so did most of the other serious partners. Grant's firm lost a major account over it. I sat very still, processing this. Does Marcus remember him clearly? "Very clearly," Daniel said. "And he still has contacts in the finance sector. He's making some calls tonight." Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. "Brooke, I need you to understand what I'm about to tell you isn't gossip. These are documented facts that Marcus is confirming through professional channels." Over the next hour, as Daniel relayed what Marcus was uncovering, a picture of Grant Ashford emerged that made my skin crawl. Grant was 38 years old, had worked at 3 different wealth management firms in the past 12 years, and specialized in what the industry politely called relationship-based client acquisition. In practical terms, that meant he identified wealthy families, cultivated personal connections, and converted those relationships into business deals and investment clients. What made Grant particularly successful and particularly predatory was his focus on families with complicated dynamics. He didn't target happy, unified families where a newcomer would face heavy scrutiny. He looked for fractures, for estrangements, for situations where members might be isolated from each other and therefore vulnerable to someone offering understanding and access. Marcus had found records of 2 previous engagements. The first, about 6 years ago, had been to a woman whose family owned a small chain of medical supply companies. The engagement had lasted 8 months before ending abruptly, amid what public records described only as financial disclosure disagreements. The second engagement 3 years ago had been to a woman from a commercial real estate family. That one had lasted nearly a year before similarly dissolving over undisclosed financial issues. In both cases, Grant had walked away cleanly, no lawsuits, no public scandals, just quiet endings that left questions unanswered. "He has a pattern," I said slowly, my mind working through the implications. "He targets women from wealthy families, gets engaged, gains access to family business information, and then something goes wrong before the actual marriage." "That's what it looks like," Daniel confirmed. "And Marcus found something else. Grant didn't just randomly meet Lily. 6 months ago, before their first date, he was researching the Kelly family extensively. Your father's insurance agency, Patricia's family background, Lily's employment history. But here's what's interesting. He also researched you. My blood went cold. How is that even possible? I've kept my business dealings completely separate. Public records, Daniel explained. LLC filings, corporate registrations, property acquisitions. If someone knows how to search and they're specifically looking for hidden assets, they can piece things together. Grant found that Brooke Kelly married and became Brooke Hartley. Under that name, he found your hospitality investments, including the recent acquisition of the Riverside estate. I stood up abruptly, needing to move. He knows I own the venue. I think so, Daniel said. And Marcus thinks that's exactly why Grant suggested it to Lily. He positioned it to her as symbolic, a place that represents new beginnings and family healing. But his real motivation was strategic. If the wedding is at your venue, you'll eventually have to engage with the family. You'll be forced into a position where you can't completely avoid them. The calculation behind it took my breath away. Grant had researched my family, discovered I had assets they didn't know about, and was now orchestrating a scenario designed to force contact. He's not marrying Lily because he loves her. I said the words, tasting bitter. He's marrying her to get access to me, to my businesses. That's what it looks like to us, Daniel said gently. But we can't be certain of his full intentions without more information. What we do know is that he has a documented pattern of financial opportunism, and he specifically researched your holdings in a way that suggests professional interest, not casual curiosity. I thought about Lily, my baby sister, who I'd rocked to sleep and taught to tie her shoes, who I hadn't really spoken to in years. Despite everything, despite the way our family had poisoned our relationship, I didn't want her hurt. I didn't want her to wake up one day and realize she'd married someone who saw her as a transaction. I need to attend that wedding, I said firmly, not just to fulfill appearances. I need to observe him, watch how he interacts with her, with the family, with me if I'm forced into conversation. If this is what we think it is, if he's targeting her to get to my businesses, I can't just stand by and let it happen. Daniel nodded slowly. I was hoping you'd say that. Because there's one more thing. He paused, and I could see he was measuring how much to tell me. I told Marcus about your decision to attend. He mentioned it to my mother. Margaret Hartley. Daniel's mother was a force of nature, a 72-year-old matriarch who'd raised 4 children, helped run an 800-acre farm, and built a network of connections across 3 counties through 4 decades of fair dealing and kept promises. She'd claimed me as family the day I married Daniel, and she didn't take kindly to people who threatened her own. My mother wants to meet with you before the wedding, Daniel said. She's already making calls. Margaret Hartley lived in the original farmhouse, a sprawling 2-story structure that had housed 4 generations of Hartleys and still smelled faintly of the lavender sachets she kept in every linen closet. When Daniel and I arrived the next morning, she was waiting on the front porch, her silver hair pulled back in her customary bun, wearing practical jeans and a cardigan, despite the fact that she could afford any luxury she wanted. Margaret had never been interested in flash. She was interested in substance. She hugged me first, a firm embrace that communicated safety and belonging, then ushered us inside to the kitchen table, where she'd laid out coffee and homemade cinnamon rolls. This was how Margaret handled serious business. She fed you first, made sure you were comfortable, and then got down to work. It was a strategy that had served her well for 72 years. Daniel told me about your sister's wedding, she said without preamble, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs that had been in the family for decades. And he told me about the groom. The way she said groom made it clear she'd already formed an opinion, and it wasn't favorable. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, needing the comfort. I don't know what to do. I haven't spoken to Lily in over a year. We're not close. But if Grant is what Daniel's partner thinks he is, I can't just let her walk into that marriage blind. Margaret sat down across from me, her weathered hands folded on the table. Let me tell you how this family works, Brooke. When you married my son, you didn't just join a family. You were claimed by one. That's not the same thing. She leaned forward slightly, her blue eyes sharp and assessing. The Hartley family operates on a very simple principle: protect your own honor, your word, and never mistake kindness for weakness. You're my daughter now as much as if I'd given birth to you myself, and I've watched your birth family treat you like an afterthought for 5 years. I've respected your choice to maintain minimal contact because that was your decision to make. But the moment they actively try to harm you, I respond. The certainty in her voice, the absolute conviction that I was worth defending, made my throat tight with emotion. This was so different from the conditional acceptance I'd grown up with, where love had to be earned and could be revoked at any perceived failure. I've made some calls, Margaret continued, and there was steel beneath the grandmotherly warmth now. Not to gossip networks, I don't waste time with that nonsense. I called Richard Brennan, who was my late husband's law partner for 30 years. I called our family accountant, who has connections to financial oversight boards. And I called a private investigator named Sarah Chen, who we've used for land disputes and contract verification. They're building a file on Grant Ashford. Financial history, employment record, any legal entanglements, the works. By the end of the week, we'll know everything there is to know about this man. I stared at her, overwhelmed by the swift, decisive action. Margaret, that's expensive. You don't have to. She held up one hand, stopping me. Don't insult me by suggesting this is about money. This is about protecting family. Besides, the Hartley family has resources most people don't see because we don't advertise them. We're not flashy. We don't drive luxury cars or wear designer labels. But 4 generations of fair-dealing community support and kept promises have built something more valuable than a stock portfolio. We have trust. She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the farmland that stretched to the horizon. When people in this region need to know if someone is trustworthy, they ask us. When they're considering a business deal, they want to know if a Hartley would vouch for it. That's not because we're rich in the way your stepmother understands wealth. It's because we've never lied, never cheated, never left someone holding the bag for our mistakes. My husband's handshake was worth more than most people's contracts, and my word carries the same weight. She turned back to face me, and her expression was fierce with protective love. So when I let people know casually, carefully, through the right channels, that Grant Ashford is someone we're watching, that he's caught the attention of the Hartley family in a way that raises concerns, doors start closing for him. Not because we're attacking him. We don't need to attack. We simply let people know who we stand with and who we don't. The community makes its own decisions after that. The power she was describing wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the quiet, inexorable force of reputation built over generations. It was the kind of power that couldn't be bought, only earned through decades of consistent integrity. And she was offering to use it to protect me. But even as gratitude flooded through me, doubt crept in alongside it. What if I'm wrong? I asked quietly. What if Grant genuinely loves Lily, and I'm seeing threats where there aren't any because of my own baggage with my family? Lily and I haven't been close in years. She absorbed their narrative that I was difficult, ungrateful, the problem child. What right do I have to interfere in her life? Margaret came back to the table and took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. You have the right, because despite everything, you still love her. I've heard you talk about your sister Brooke. I've seen your face when Daniel mentions her in passing. You remember the little girl she was before your family poisoned that relationship. That love doesn't disappear just because it's been buried under hurt. She was right. I did remember Lily before everything got complicated, a toddler who'd follow me around the house, a little girl who'd insisted I read her bedtime stories, a child who'd looked at me like I hung the moon before Patricia taught her otherwise. Here's what I suggest, Margaret said. Attend the wedding, observe. Don't reveal Grant's past unless he proves himself to be an active threat to Lily's well-being. Don't expose your ownership of the venue unless it becomes strategically necessary. And absolutely don't reveal whatever that business is about your birth mother not yet because you don't fully understand it yourself. She squeezed my hand. "But know that we're watching. We're building information. And the moment they hurt you, not inconvenience you, not make you uncomfortable, but actively try to harm you, we respond. Decisively." I nodded slowly, feeling something settle in my chest. I had backup. I had family who would stand with me without conditions, without hesitation. It was still foreign after 35 years of the opposite, but I was learning to accept it. Margaret stood and walked to the counter, picking up a manila folder I hadn't noticed before. She handed it to me, her expression serious. "Read this before you go to any wedding events. You need to know who you're dealing with." I spent the next 2 days reading through the folder Margaret had given me. By the time I finished, I understood exactly why she wanted me informed. Grant Ashford's financial history read like a masterclass in legal but unethical maneuvering employment at firms that later faced regulatory scrutiny involvement in deals that somehow always benefited him while leaving clients holding depreciated assets and a pattern of moving cities every few years just before questions caught up with him. None of it was prosecutable, but all of it was damning. The pre-wedding dinner was scheduled 6 weeks before the ceremony at an upscale restaurant in my hometown that Patricia had undoubtedly chosen for its social visibility. I drove the 2 hours alone. Daniel had respected my decision to attend, but refused to subject himself to people who'd proven they didn't deserve his presence. I couldn't fault him for that. Part of me wished I had his clarity about boundaries. I arrived exactly on time, wearing a simple but well-tailored dress that projected quiet confidence without ostentation. The hostess directed me to a private dining room where my family was already gathered, drinks in hand, laughing at some story I'd missed. The scene looked like something from a lifestyle magazine, the perfect family celebrating their daughter's upcoming wedding. Then they noticed me, and the performance began. Patricia glided over first, her embrace perfectly calibrated, warm enough to look maternal to any observer, brief enough to communicate distance. "Brooke, darling, you made it. We were just discussing the menu selections." She was 62 now, but looked a decade younger, her silver blonde hair expertly colored and styled, her jewelry understated but expensive. She'd always known how to wield appearance as currency. My father stood back, nodding at me with a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. Robert Kelly had aged since I'd seen him last, 68 now, with more gray in his hair and a weariness in his posture that suggested the weight of old guilt. He'd never been a strong man, always deferring to Patricia's stronger will, but at least in my childhood, he'd occasionally shown flashes of genuine affection. Now he looked diminished, a supporting player in Patricia's carefully directed production. Lily was radiant, I had to admit that. 28 years old, with Patricia's elegant bone structure and our father's dark eyes, she wore her happiness like armor. When she saw me, her smile was polite but guarded the warmth, not quite reaching her eyes either. "Hi, Brooke. It's good to see you." The words were correct but hollow, the kind of thing you'd say to a distant acquaintance, not the sister who'd once braided your hair and taught you to ride a bike. Then Grant Ashford stepped forward and every nerve in my body went on alert. He was handsome in a practiced way, perfectly groomed, expensive suit, the kind of smile that had been perfected in front of mirrors and deployed strategically. 38 years old, with the confidence of someone who'd made a career of reading people and exploiting their weaknesses. When he extended his hand, I took it, and his grip lingered just a second too long, his eyes assessing me with an intensity that had nothing to do with casual politeness. "Brooke," he said warmly, "Lily's told me so much about you. It's wonderful to finally meet the famous sister." The statement was designed to sound friendly, but I knew it was a lie. Lily had barely mentioned me over the years, Patricia had made sure of that. Whatever Grant knew about me hadn't come from casual family conversation. He'd researched me, studied me, and now he was testing to see how much I knew that he knew. "It's nice to meet you too," I said neutrally, reclaiming my hand. "Congratulations on the engagement." As we settled at the table, I noticed immediately how the seating had been arranged. Patricia at the head with Robert to her right and Lily to her left. Grant beside Lily, then various family friends I vaguely recognized. And me at the far end of the table, physically separated from the core group by just enough distance to make conversation awkward. It wasn't accidental. Nothing Patricia did was ever accidental. Throughout dinner, Patricia orchestrated the conversation with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. She asked about my job in hospitality, with the kind of tone you'd use discussing temporary employment, something to fill time until real opportunity came along. "Still working at hotels, dear. That's nice. It must keep you busy." The implication was clear, quaint, modest, nothing to take seriously. When discussing the wedding budget, she mentioned casually, "Of course we're sparing no expense for Lily. It's what she deserves. The Riverside estate alone cost more than most people make in a year, but Robert and I agreed that nothing but the best would do." She didn't look at me when she said it, but the message landed anyway. Lily deserved investment. Lily deserved celebration. Lily deserved everything I'd never been given. A photographer appeared midway through dinner, another Patricia orchestration. She gathered everyone for immediate family photos, directing poses with expert efficiency. When I moved to join, she stopped me with a gentle hand on my arm. "Actually, darling, let's do one with just Robert, Lily, Grant, and myself first. The core family unit. We can do extended family after." Extended family. As if I were a cousin or a distant aunt, not Lily's sister. But it was Grant who unsettled me most. Throughout dinner, he made a point of engaging me in conversation, asking questions that seemed friendly, but probed for specific information. He wanted to know about my marriage to a farmer, how refreshing in this day and age, and whether Daniel's family was well established in the agricultural sector. He mentioned colleagues in hospitality investment, dropping names of firms I vaguely recognized, and suggested we should discuss opportunities sometime. When he proposed a toast halfway through the meal, he raised his glass and said, "To family, both the family we're born into and the family we choose. May we always remember that blood creates obligation, but love creates loyalty." The words sounded philosophical, even touching, but when he said them, he was looking directly at me. The statement felt less like a toast and more like a negotiation position being staked out. After dinner, as I was making my polite goodbyes, Grant cornered me near the coat check. His friendly demeanor remained intact, but his words carried a different weight. "Your sister is lucky to have family who care so much about her happiness," he said quietly. "I hope you know that I care about her too. And I hope that as we all become family, we can work together, support each other, find ways to make everyone's lives better." He paused, letting that sink in. "I'd love to continue our conversation about hospitality investments sometime. I think we might have mutual interests." I smiled politely, non-committally, and excused myself. As I walked toward the parking lot, my mind was racing. Grant had just confirmed everything Margaret's file had suggested. He wasn't interested in Lily for herself. He was interested in access and connections in the business opportunities he thought our family represented, and he'd specifically targeted me as someone worth cultivating. I was unlocking my car when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find my father standing alone in the parking lot, his hands shoved in his pockets. For the first time in years, he looked like he actually wanted to talk to me privately. "Brooke, wait." My father's voice cut through the cool evening air, and I paused with my hand on the car door. He stood a few feet away, hands stuffed deep in his pockets, looking older than his 68 years. The dim parking lot lights cast shadows across his face, emphasizing every line and hollow that hadn't been there when I was younger. I waited, not making it easy for him, not filling the silence the way I might have years ago when I was still desperate for his approval. "I know I haven't been the father you deserved." He began, the words coming out rehearsed like he'd practiced this speech on the drive over but was now forgetting his lines. "I know we pushed you away. Patricia and I, we made choices that hurt you, and I'm sorry for that." The apology should have meant something. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, I would have clung to these words, analyzed them for any hint of genuine remorse, built entire fantasies of reconciliation around them. But standing there in the parking lot of an expensive restaurant where I'd just been systematically reminded of my outsider status, all I felt was a bone-deep weariness. "It was complicated." He continued, his eyes sliding away from mine, finding something fascinating about the pavement. Patricia had just lost. There were circumstances you don't understand. Things that happened before you were old enough to remember. I did what I thought was best at the time. There it was. The justification. The explanation that explained nothing. The appeal to circumstances I supposedly couldn't understand, as if my childhood exclusion and decades of emotional neglect were simply unfortunate but unavoidable consequences of adult decisions I was too young to comprehend. "Dad," I said quietly, and something in my tone made him finally look at me. "I stopped needing this apology years ago. I built a life without it. Without you." He flinched visibly at the past tense at the word needing spoken like something that had already died and been buried. "Brooke, please, I'm trying to what?" I asked, not unkindly but without the accommodation I'd once offered him. "To feel better about choices you're not willing to fully acknowledge. To maintain some kind of relationship that's built on me accepting half-truths and continued silence about whatever really happened." "It's not that simple," he protested weakly. "It actually is," I replied. "If you want a relationship with me, it starts with honesty. Real honesty, not vague apologies peppered with justifications about how complicated everything was. Until you're ready for that, we're just going through motions. Playing parts in Patricia's performance of family unity." I turned back to my car, emotionally exhausted and ready to drive home to Daniel to the life I'd built where I didn't have to parse every interaction for hidden meanings and calculated slights. "Your mother," Robert blurted out, and I froze with my car door half open. "She tried to reach you. Years ago. Multiple times. Patricia thought it was better if—" He stopped abruptly, seeming to realize he'd ventured into territory he hadn't meant to explore. I turned back very slowly, my heart suddenly pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "What did you just say?" Robert's face had gone pale. He took a step backward, shaking his head. "I shouldn't have said anything. It's in the past, Brooke. It doesn't matter now." "My mother tried to contact me." My voice came out higher than I intended, 30 years of questions and abandonment issues condensing into those 6 words. "When?" "How many times?" "What do you mean Patricia thought it was better?" "Please," he said, and he actually looked frightened now. "Just let it stay in the past. Some things are better left alone." But I couldn't let it alone. For 30 years I'd believed my mother had abandoned me completely, had walked away and never looked back, had started a new life somewhere and forgotten about the 5-year-old daughter she'd left behind. That belief had shaped everything about how I saw myself, my worth, my fundamental lovability. "What did Patricia do?" I demanded, moving toward him. "Dad, what did she do?" But he was already backing away, shaking his head, retreating to his own car. "I can't talk about this. I shouldn't have mentioned it. Please, Brooke, just leave it alone." He got into his car quickly like he was escaping and drove away before I could stop him, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot with a truth I'd never expected. My mother hadn't just abandoned me. Someone had prevented contact. I drove home in a daze, my mind spinning through implications and possibilities. When I walked into our house, Daniel took one look at my face and simply pulled me into his arms, asking no questions, just offering the steady presence I needed to process what had just happened. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Daniel's steady breathing beside me provided the only anchor to the present moment. Every memory I had of my mother's departure, every assumption I'd built about why she left and never came back, every piece of my self-concept that had been built on the foundation of maternal abandonment, all of it was suddenly suspect. At 3 a.m, I got up and went to my office. I pulled out the single photograph I had of my mother, studied her face in the dim glow of my desk lamp, and tried to remember everything I knew about her family. There had been a sister, my mother's younger sister, Caroline. I had vague memories of her from before the divorce, a woman with a kind laugh who'd brought me books and always seemed to slip me extra cookies when no one was looking. After the divorce, Patricia had systematically cut off all contact with my mother's side of the family. Any mention of them was forbidden. Any questions were shut down. I'd learned not to ask. But I was 35 now, not 5, and I had resources Patricia couldn't control. It took me an hour of searching online, cross-referencing old addresses I half remembered with current records, but I finally found her. Caroline Mitchell, living in a small coastal town 4 hours away. I sat staring at the email address for a long time before I started typing. Dear Caroline, this is Brooke Kelly. Brooke Hartley now. I don't know if you remember me. It's been over 20 years since we last spoke. I have questions about my mother, about what really happened after she left. If you're willing to talk, I'd like to visit. I understand if this is too much to ask after so long. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then sat back and waited, not really expecting a response at 4 a.m. My inbox pinged 7 minutes later. Brooke, I've been waiting for this email for 20 years. Come whenever you can. There's so much you don't know. I booked a day trip for the following weekend, knowing that whatever I learned might change everything about my understanding of my family, my past, and the wedding I was about to attend. Carolyn's house sat on a bluff overlooking the ocean, a small cottage with weathered shingles and window boxes full of late summer flowers. When she opened the door, I saw my mother's eyes looking back at me, the same shape, the same color, even the same way they crinkled at the corners. She was 65 now, her hair more silver than brown, but she pulled me into an embrace that felt like coming home to a place I'd forgotten existed. Oh, Brooke, she whispered, holding me at arm's length to look at me properly. You look so much like her, like Jennifer. Come in, sweetheart. I've waited so long for this. Inside her home was warm and lived in, full of books and photographs, and the kind of comfortable clutter that speaks of a life well loved. She made tea with shaking hands, and I noticed she'd been crying before I arrived. When we finally sat down at her kitchen table, she reached across and gripped my hands tightly. I need to tell you everything, she said. And I need you to let me finish before you ask questions, because if I stop, I might not be able to start again. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Your mother, Jennifer, was your father's first wife? Caroline began, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. They were happy, truly happy in the beginning, young and in love and building a life together. When Jennifer got pregnant with you, Robert was over the moon. And when you were born, I've never seen two people more devoted to a child. She smiled at the memory, then the smile faded. When you were 4, Jennifer got pregnant again. Another girl. They were ecstatic. Robert had already started painting the nursery. Jennifer was making plans. Everything seemed perfect. She paused, gathering strength, and I felt ice forming in my stomach. At 7 months, Jennifer went into premature labor. They rushed her to the hospital, but the baby, your sister, didn't survive. Jennifer was devastated, completely shattered. She was still in the hospital, still grieving, when she discovered something that destroyed what was left of her world. Caroline's voice broke. Robert had been having an affair with his secretary, Patricia, and Patricia was also pregnant. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the table, forcing myself to breathe. Your father was terrified, Caroline continued. Terrified of scandal, of being seen as the man who'd destroyed 2 families, of losing his business reputation. So he made a decision that I still can't comprehend 30 years later. He told Jennifer's family and everyone else that Jennifer's baby had survived after all, that she'd been born healthy despite the premature labor. The death of Jennifer's actual baby was hushed up, buried in hospital records that Robert had the money and connections to keep quiet. And he brought home Patricia's newborn daughter and told the world this was Jennifer's child. No, I whispered, but Caroline kept going. Patricia moved into your house as the nanny for the recovered baby, then the stepmother after a carefully orchestrated divorce, then the official mother when they married. For 28 years, they've maintained this fiction that Lily is Jennifer's biological daughter, that you and Lily are full sisters who share the same mother. Everyone believes Jennifer gave birth to both of you and then abandoned you, but the truth is, Jennifer only gave birth to you. She lost her second baby. She discovered her husband's affair and the unthinkable deception he'd committed. And when she couldn't bear living in a house with her husband's mistress and the baby that had replaced her dead child, she left. "Lily isn't my sister." The words came out strangled. "Not biologically," Caroline confirmed. "She's Patricia's daughter. Robert legally adopted her after the marriage, and they've maintained the lie ever since. Everyone in your family, everyone in their social circle, they all believe the same story. That Jennifer gave birth to 2 daughters and abandoned them both. I thought I might be sick. 30 years of my life. 30 years of believing my mother had chosen to leave me. 30 years of watching Lily receive all the love and attention I was denied, and it was all built on a lie so monstrous I could barely comprehend it." "Jennifer tried to take you with her when she left," Caroline said, pulling out a folder I hadn't noticed on the table. "But Robert had lawyer's money, social standing. Jennifer had nothing but grief and betrayal. The court gave him full custody, but she never stopped trying to reach you." She opened the folder and spread out letters, dozens of them. Envelopes addressed to me at different ages, 8, 13, 16, 18, 21. Birthday cards, Christmas letters. All returned unopened, marked, "Refused by Guardian," in Patricia's precise handwriting. I picked up one at random, postmarked on my 16th birthday. Inside was a card with a heartfelt message. "My darling Brooke, I think of you every single day. I hope you're happy, healthy, loved. I hope someday you'll want to know the truth about why I left. I never stopped being your mother, even from a distance. All my love, always, Mom." Patricia intercepted them all, I said numbly. "Every single one," Caroline confirmed. "And now I understand why. Because you, Brooke, are the living proof that Patricia's entire life is built on a lie. You're Jennifer's daughter, the real first child, the one who could expose everything if you ever learned the truth. Patricia didn't hate you because you were difficult or ungrateful or any of the things she told you. She hated you because every time she looked at you, she saw the wife. She replaced the marriage. She destroyed the legitimacy she never truly had." Everything suddenly made terrible, perfect sense. The systematic exclusion, the favoritism toward Lily, the way Patricia had worked so hard to isolate me, undermine my confidence, make me seem unstable. It was all strategic. If I ever claimed anything different, no one would believe the difficult, ungrateful daughter over the devoted mother who'd raised 2 girls alone after their birth mother abandoned them. "Your mother lives 2 towns from here," Caroline said gently. "She remarried a good man, had another child. You have a half-brother, Marcus, he's 24 now. But she never stopped loving you, Brooke. She never stopped trying to reach you." I sat in silence, trying to process a revelation that rewrote my entire childhood, my entire understanding of who I was. Finally, I managed to ask, "Does Lily know any of this?" Caroline shook her head slowly. "No one knows, except the people who were there, me, Jennifer, Robert, Patricia. And they'll do anything to keep it that way." I drove home from Caroline's in a fog, my mind unable to fully process the magnitude of what I'd learned. When I walked through the door, Daniel took one look at my face and simply held me while I cried for the first time in years. Not the quiet, controlled tears I'd allowed myself before, but deep, wrenching sobs for the mother who'd been stolen from me, for the sister who didn't know her own story, for the 30 years I'd lived believing a lie. The next morning, Margaret called. Her investigator had completed the full report on Grant Ashford, and she wanted to review it with Daniel and me together. We drove to the farmhouse, and Margaret spread the documents across her kitchen table with the grim efficiency of someone preparing for battle. "Sarah Chen is thorough," Margaret said, tapping the thick folder. "And what she found is worse than we suspected." Grant Ashford had been engaged 3 times before Lily. 3 times. The first engagement 12 years ago had been to a woman named Claire Donovan, whose family owned a small chain of car dealerships across 2 states. The engagement had lasted 11 months before Claire's father discovered that Grant had been forging his daughter's signature on loan applications, attempting to secure capital for what he called investment opportunities that would have left Claire personally liable for debts she knew nothing about. No charges were filed. The Donovan family had chosen to absorb the financial hit rather than face the public embarrassment of admitting their daughter had nearly been defrauded by her own fiancé. The second engagement 7 years ago had been to Rebecca Marsh, whose family developed commercial real estate. That relationship had ended when Rebecca found evidence that Grant had been secretly meeting with her family's primary competitors, trading inside information about upcoming projects for promises of future positions and equity stakes. Again, no legal action. The Marsh family had simply ended the engagement quietly and moved on, preferring discretion to scandal. The third engagement just 3 years ago had been to a woman named Sophia Brenner, who had a substantial trust fund from her grandmother's estate. Grant had convinced her to invest in a can't-miss hospitality venture that turned out to be largely fabricated with inflated projections and partnerships that didn't actually exist. Sophia had lost over $200,000 before her family's accountant caught the discrepancies. That time there had been threats of legal action, but Grant had returned just enough money to avoid prosecution, then promptly moved to a new city. "He has a pattern," Margaret said, her voice hard. "He targets women from families with specific types of wealth businesses. He can access connections. He can exploit assets. He can manipulate. He gets engaged, gains trust and access, extracts what he can, then disappears before consequences catch up. Each time the families choose discretion over justice, which means he's free to do it again." I felt sick. This wasn't just a gold digger looking for an easy life. This was systematic predation. A man who'd made a career of identifying vulnerable women from wealthy families and exploiting them for financial gain. "There's more," Daniel said quietly, pointing to another section of the report. "About the venue choice." Grant's suggestion of the Riverside estate hadn't been about aesthetics or symbolism, despite what he'd told Lily about it representing new beginnings and family healing. Through his hospitality industry connections, he discovered that the venue had recently been acquired by an LLC with ties to Brooke Hartley. He'd done enough digging to know that Brooke Kelly had married and changed her name, that she had investments in the hospitality sector, and that she was the one with real wealth in the Kelly family. The investigator had even found email exchanges between Grant and a colleague discussing the estranged sister angle as a strategic opportunity. Grant had specifically written, "The venue choice will force engagement. Either she reveals ownership and exposes her wealth to the family, making her a direct target for future cultivation, or she stays silent and watches the wedding proceed at her own property, which gives me leverage for post-marriage business discussions." He'd been planting seeds with Lily for months, casually mentioning that family reconciliation would be good for everyone, and that Brooke probably has connections in hospitality that could help my career trajectory. He was positioning himself to use the marriage not as an end goal, but as a gateway first to Lily's modest family connections, then to me. As I read through the evidence, a sickening realization crystallized. Grant wasn't in love with Lily. He'd chosen her because she was beautiful enough to make the pursuit look genuine, socially connected enough to provide initial access, and crucially, because she had a wealthy, estranged sister who owned hospitality businesses, exactly Grant's target sector. Lily's own income from her nonprofit marketing job was modest. Robert and Patricia's wealth was comfortable but not substantial, middle tier at best. That wasn't enough for Grant's ambitions. He needed more, and I was the more he'd been planning for all along. I could see his entire strategy mapped out in these documents. He'd love-bombed Lily with exactly the kind of attention Patricia had raised her to crave: expensive dates, public displays of affection, constant validation of her beauty and social value. He'd proposed quickly within 6 months, before Lily had time to see past the performance. He'd pushed for a large, expensive wedding that would create debt and emotional investment, making it harder for Lily to back out. And he'd specifically requested the Riverside estate, knowing it would eventually force my hand. If this wedding happened, My sister. My half-sister. I corrected myself painfully. Would be married to a man who saw her as a business transaction, a stepping stone, a placeholder until he could access the real target. And once he had legal ties to the family, once he'd established himself as Lily's husband, he'd start working on reconciliation with me, positioning himself to exploit my businesses the way he'd exploited 3 other women's families before. I looked up at Daniel and Margaret, both watching me with concern and determination. My hands were shaking. "I can't let her marry him," I said, my voice barely steady. "But if I expose everything, his pattern, his strategy, why he really chose our family, Patricia will know I've been investigating. She'll know I'm a threat. And if she feels cornered, she might tell Lily the truth about her parentage herself, but twisted to make me look like I'm lying or vindictive." I pressed my palms against my eyes, overwhelmed by the impossible choice. If I expose Grant, the truth about Lily's biological mother comes out too. She'll lose everything she believes about her identity. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the investigator's report spread in front of me, staring at evidence that could destroy Grant Ashford's plans completely. The past engagements, the pattern of financial manipulation, the documented strategy of targeting families for business access, it was all there, thoroughly researched and professionally verified. I had the power to stop this wedding, to save Lily from making a catastrophic mistake. But I also knew the truth about her parentage. And those 2 pieces of information were connected in ways that made any action feel like walking through a minefield. If I revealed Patricia's decades-long deception about Lily's biological mother, Grant would almost certainly flee. He targeted stable, respectable families where he could blend in and build trust. A family embroiled in scandal with explosive revelations about infidelity and replaced dead babies would be useless to him. The wedding would collapse immediately, but Lily would be devastated. She'd learn that Patricia wasn't her biological mother, that I wasn't her full sister, that her entire identity was built on a cover-up designed to hide her father's affair and her stepmother's illegitimate pregnancy. She'd discover that the woman who raised her had spent 28 years prioritizing the protection of a lie over any genuine relationship with me. Every memory, every family story, every assumption about who she was would be called into question. Did I have the right to destroy Lily's sense of self just to save her from a bad marriage? Daniel found me still sitting there at 2 a.m, the untouched evidence scattered across the table. He made tea without asking if I wanted any, set a mug in front of me, and waited. "I don't know what to do," I finally said. "I can stop this wedding, but the cost might be too high." "Tell me what you're thinking," he said quietly. I explained the impossible choice: use the parentage secret to make Grant run, or hold back that nuclear option and risk Lily marrying him anyway. Daniel listened without interrupting, then sat back and considered his words carefully. "Lily is an adult," he said finally. "If you warn her about Grant with the evidence we have, his past engagements, his financial pattern, his calculated approach to your family, and she still chooses to marry him, that's her right. You can't force her to see the truth, Brooke. And destroying her entire understanding of her family to save her from one bad decision isn't protection. It's control." I started to protest, but he held up a hand. "Think about what you'd be doing," he continued. "You'd be deciding for her what she should know and when she should know it based on what you think is best for her. That's exactly what Patricia did to you. She decided you shouldn't know about your mother's attempts to contact you because she thought it was better for the family. You'd be making the same kind of choice, just with different justifications." His words hit hard because they were true. I'd spent my entire life being controlled by Patricia's decisions about what information I deserved to have. Was I about to do the same thing to Lily, just with better intentions? The next morning, Margaret called and asked to come over. When she arrived, she'd clearly been thinking about the same problem from a different angle. "That girl deserves to know who she is," Margaret said firmly, settling into our living room with the certainty of someone who'd already made up her mind. "She deserves to know where she comes from and what kind of people raised her. Yes, it will hurt. Lord knows learning that truth would shake anyone to their core. But living a lie hurts more in the long run, Brooke. It eats at you from the inside even when you don't know what the lie is. But the timing, I started. Is never going to be good, Margaret interrupted. There's no perfect moment to learn that your entire childhood was built on deception. But if you stay silent and this marriage destroys her, if Grant takes everything from her the way he's taken from other women, you'll carry that guilt forever. You'll know you could have stopped it and didn't because you were trying to protect her from a truth she has every right to know. She leaned forward, her expression intense. Sometimes love means telling hard truths even when the timing is terrible. Sometimes protecting someone means giving them information they need to protect themselves, even if that information is painful. For 3 sleepless nights, I wrestled with the decision. I reviewed the evidence obsessively. I imagined different scenarios, different approaches, different outcomes. I thought about the Lily I'd known as a child before Patricia's manipulation had fully poisoned our relationship. I thought about the woman she'd become shaped by lies she didn't know she was living. Finally, I arrived at a compromise that felt like the most ethical path through an impossible situation. I would expose Grant thoroughly, but I would do it using only the documented evidence of his pattern, the previous engagements, the financial manipulation, the calculated targeting of families. I wouldn't mention the parentage secret at all. I'd approach Lily privately, show her the investigator's report, and let her make her own choice about the wedding with full information about who she was marrying. If Lily asked questions about family dynamics, if she wanted to know why I was warning her despite our estrangement, I'd answer honestly. And if Patricia tried to discredit my warning by claiming I was lying out of jealousy or attention-seeking, then I'd use the truth about Lily's parentage as a defense, as proof that Patricia had always prioritized protecting her secrets over anyone's well-being. But I wouldn't lead with it. I wouldn't weaponize Lily's identity to stop a wedding. I'd give her the information she needed about Grant, and trust her to be smart enough to make her own decision. It wasn't perfect. It risked Lily dismissing the evidence, believing Patricia's inevitable counter-narrative marrying Grant anyway. But it respected her agency while protecting her from an immediate threat. I called Lily and asked to meet privately, suggesting coffee at a neutral location. She agreed, sounding surprised, but willing. We scheduled it for the following week, 4 weeks before the wedding. But 3 days before our scheduled meeting, my phone rang with an unknown number. When I answered, Grant Ashford's smooth voice said, "Brooke, I think it's time we had a real conversation. Just the 2 of us. I have a proposition for you." I agreed to meet Grant at a cafe in the city, a neutral public location, where his charm offensive would be somewhat constrained by the presence of other patrons. When I arrived, he was already seated at a corner table, 2 coffees ordered, playing the role of considerate future brother-in-law. He stood when I approached, his smile warm, and practiced his handshake just slightly too familiar for someone I'd met once at a family dinner. "Brooke, thank you for making time," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "I know we're all busy with wedding preparations, but I thought it was important that we actually get to know each other before becoming family." I settled into my chair, keeping my expression pleasantly neutral. My posture relaxed, despite every instinct telling me I was sitting across from a predator. "Of course. What did you want to discuss?" Grant added cream to his coffee with the kind of casual elegance that spoke of years perfecting these small performances. "I wanted to talk openly adult to adult about the family situation. I know you and your family have had difficulties over the years. Lily's mentioned the estrangement, though, honestly, she doesn't really understand it." He gave me a sympathetic look that was almost convincing. Patricia has shaped the narrative, let's say. But I'm not naive about family dynamics. They're complicated. I don't judge. The positioning was masterful. He was casting himself as the understanding outsider, someone who could see past the family propaganda, someone I might be able to trust. It was exactly the approach someone would use if they were genuinely trying to build a bridge. But I'd read his history. I knew this was technique, not sincerity. Family is definitely complicated. I agreed, not giving him anything substantial. He leaned forward slightly, dropping his voice to create false intimacy. "I also know you've done very well for yourself. Hospitality industry, property investments. That's impressive, especially building it independently the way you have. I work in wealth management, and I see a lot of people who inherit opportunity. You created yours. I respect that. There it was, the shift from personal to professional delivered smoothly enough that it might seem like natural conversation flow. He was probing, testing how much I'd admit. I've been fortunate, I said carefully. The Riverside estate, for instance. He continued, watching my face closely. Beautiful property, historic, well-positioned in the market. I understand you have connections there. The phrasing was deliberate, connections, not ownership. He was fishing, seeing if I'd correct him or elaborate. It's a lovely venue, I replied, taking a sip of coffee. Lily made a good choice. Something flickered in his eyes, frustration maybe at my deflection, but his smile never wavered. Here's what I'm thinking, he said, shifting his approach. Once Lily and I are married, we'll all be family, right? There's no reason for old conflicts to continue. I could help facilitate reconciliation. Patricia listens to me surprisingly. I seem to have a way of getting through to her. The subtle threat beneath the offer was unmistakable. He had influence with Patricia that I didn't. And in that new family dynamic, he continued, there could be real business synergies. Your hospitality portfolio, my client network and wealth management, maybe even bringing your father's insurance business into play for comprehensive commercial property packages. We could structure something beneficial for everyone involved. I let the silence stretch for a moment, studying him. He was essentially offering to sell me access to my own family. He'd convince Patricia to treat me better if I gave him access to my businesses. A protection racket disguised as family healing. That's an interesting perspective, I said neutrally. Grant leaned back, his confidence growing as he misread my non-rejection as potential agreement. I think about long-term value, Brooke. Building relationships, creating opportunities. I see a lot of potential here. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, of course, if there's resistance to working together, if people want to keep operating in silos, well, information has a way of surfacing. Your various business holdings, for instance. If Patricia knew the full extent of your success, she could be very territorial about financial matters. You know how she is about control. There it was, the threat delivered with plausible deniability. He was telling me he'd expose my wealth to Patricia if I didn't cooperate, knowing that would turn her jealousy into active sabotage. He thought he was being subtle, but he'd just shown me exactly what he was willing to do. I took another sip of coffee, letting him think I was considering his proposal, that I was worried about his threat. That's a lot to think about, I said finally. I'll need some time to consider it. Of course, he said smoothly, clearly pleased with himself. Take all the time you need. Well, not all the time. The wedding's in 4 weeks. He smiled like it was a joke, but the timeline was another pressure tactic. I just wanted to put it out there. Family should work together, not against each other. Don't you think? Family should be honest with each other, I replied, standing and gathering my things. Thank you for the coffee, Grant. As I walked to my car, my hands were shaking with controlled fury. Grant had just confirmed everything the investigator found and more. He wasn't just targeting Lily as an entry point to the family he'd specifically researched. He identified my assets, and was now attempting to leverage the wedding to force me into a business relationship, while simultaneously threatening to weaponize Patricia's jealousy if I refused. He'd made a critical tactical error, though. He'd shown his cards too early, revealed his strategy before he had any leverage, and he'd badly underestimated both my intelligence and my resources. He thought I was isolated, vulnerable, desperate enough for family acceptance that I'd trade business access for Patricia's conditional approval. He had no idea about Daniel's family, about Margaret's network, about the protective circle I'd built. He'd researched what I owned, but not who I'd married or what connections I had, and now I knew exactly what he was planning. I sat in my car and called Margaret immediately. He's more dangerous than we thought, I said without preamble. He just tried to extort me into a business partnership using the wedding as leverage, and he threatened to expose my holdings to Patricia if I don't cooperate. What do you need? Margaret asked, her voice sharp and focused. I need to meet with Lily tomorrow, not next week. Grant is already positioning himself to control the narrative, and I can't give him any more time to set his traps. I called Lily that afternoon and asked if we could meet for lunch the next day, framing it simply as a chance to talk before the wedding. There was a pause on the other end of the line, long enough that I thought she might refuse, but finally she agreed to meet me at a restaurant halfway between our cities, neutral territory for both of us. When she arrived the next day, I could see immediately that she'd been coached. Her posture was defensive, her smile tight and practiced, and she made a point of checking her phone twice in the first 5 minutes, signaling that she didn't plan to stay long. This was Patricia's influence teaching her daughter to keep the conversation superficial, to maintain polite distance, to protect herself from whatever manipulation she'd been warned I would attempt. I decided against small talk. We didn't have time for the pretense of sisterly catching up, and I wouldn't insult either of us by pretending this was a casual reunion. "Lily, I need to show you something about Grant," I said, pulling a folder from my bag. "And I need you to look at it with an open mind before reacting." Her jaw tightened immediately. "Brooke, if this is about—" "Please," I interrupted gently. "Just look at the evidence first. Then you can decide what you think." I spread the documents across the table, methodically organized in a way that told the story clearly. News articles about broken engagements with names redacted, but circumstances detailed enough to establish pattern. The investigators' report on Grant's employment history showing gaps and sudden city changes that correlated with each failed relationship. Testimony from Rebecca Marsh, his second ex-fiancée, who Margaret's connections had convinced to share her experience with the pattern of financial manipulation. And most damning records showing that Grant had researched the Kelly family extensively before ever asking Lily on a first date. Public record searches, social media analysis, LLC filings related to my business holdings, all dated weeks before his chance meeting with her at a charity fundraiser. "I'm not telling you what to do," I said quietly as Lily stared at the papers. "I'm giving you information you deserve to have before making a permanent decision." Lily's first reaction was exactly what Patricia had trained her for. "This is exactly like you," she said, her voice rising slightly. "Trying to ruin something good because you can't stand to see me happy. You've always been like this, dramatic and paranoid about family." The words were Patricia's verbatim. I'd heard variations of them my entire childhood. Lily had been primed for this exact scenario, given the script to defend against my intervention before she'd even seen the evidence. But I didn't get defensive. I didn't argue. I simply sat back and let her look at the documents, let the facts speak for themselves. "These relationships could have been legitimate failures," Lily continued, but her voice had less certainty now. "People break up. It doesn't mean he's some kind of predator." "Read the dates," I said calmly. "He researched our family 6 weeks before meeting you. He searched public records for my business holdings. He specifically suggested the Riverside estate as your venue, after discovering I'd recently acquired it through my LLC. Lily's hands stilled on the papers. She looked up at me, and I could see the moment her defensive walls started to crack. "Why would he research us unless—" She couldn't finish the thought, couldn't say out loud what the evidence was clearly showing. "Unless he was selecting a target, not falling in love," I supplied gently. She wanted to reject it. I could see her struggling, trying to find a way to dismiss what was in front of her as jealousy or misunderstanding or anything other than what it actually was. But the evidence was too thorough, too documented, too specific. There were dates, times, documented searches. There was testimony from another woman who'd lived through exactly what Lily was being set up for. Lily sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the folder, her face cycling through emotions I recognized: denial, anger, confusion, hurt. Finally, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You haven't spoken to me in years. We're not close. Why do you care?" This was my moment of vulnerability. The question I'd known was coming, but still wasn't fully prepared to answer. I took a breath and told her the truth. "Because despite everything, you're still my sister. I remember when you were little before things got complicated. I remember braiding your hair and reading you bedtime stories. I remember you following me around the house insisting I play dolls with you even though I was too old for it. I remember loving you before the family dynamics made that impossible. My own eyes were stinging now. And I don't want to watch you marry someone who sees you as a transaction instead of a person. Lily's tears spilled over. She remembered those moments too. I could see it in her face. The buried memories of a time when we'd been actual sisters instead of strangers, shaped by Patricia's manipulation. "What should I do?" she whispered. I shook my head firmly. "That's your choice, Lily. I can only give you information. I'm not going to tell you what to decide. But whatever you choose, I'll respect it. If you look at this evidence and still want to marry him, that's your right. I've done what I needed to do by making sure you knew." She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes, pulling the folder toward her. "I need time to think about this, to process it." "Of course," I said. "Take all the time you need." As she stood to leave, gathering the documents carefully, she paused and turned back to me. Her next question was so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "Was Mom always like this, Patricia, I mean? Always manipulating things?" It was the first crack in Lily's perception of our mother, the first question that suggested she was starting to see the patterns that had shaped our entire childhood. "Yes," I answered honestly. "Always." 2 days later, my phone rang with Lily's number, but when I answered, I could hear Grant's voice in the background before she even spoke. She was calling from his apartment, and her voice was tense. "Grant and I need to talk about some concerns that have come up," she said carefully, and I knew immediately that he was listening, that he'd already figured out I was behind whatever questions she was asking. The war had just escalated. Within 6 hours of that phone call, Grant had made his countermove. I know this because Patricia called my father's cell phone, not mine, never mine. And Robert, in a moment of weakness or guilt, forwarded me a voicemail she'd left him. In it, Patricia's voice was sharp with vindication. "Grant came to us with very disturbing information about Brooke's behavior. She's been spreading malicious lies about him, trying to sabotage Lily's wedding. He thinks she might be trying to extort money or business favors by threatening to destroy the relationship unless we meet her demands. Robert, we need to protect Lily from her sister's instability." The narrative was so perfectly crafted it took my breath away. Grant had gone directly to my parents with a pre-prepared story that positioned me as the villain, jealous, unstable, vindictive, trying to ruin Lily's happiness because I couldn't stand to see her succeed where I'd failed. He'd given Patricia exactly what she'd been waiting for, a publicly defensible reason to villainize me, a way to justify decades of poor treatment by framing me as the problem child whose latest transgression was attempting to destroy her sister's wedding. And Patricia, terrified that any real scrutiny of this wedding might lead to questions about family history, about why there was so much conflict about secrets that couldn't bear exposure, had immediately launched a full campaign to isolate Lily from my influence. I learned the details through Emma, Lily's maid of honor, who called me 2 days later, sounding shaken. "I don't know what's happening, but you should know what they're saying," she told me. "Patricia is telling everyone that you've always been jealous of Lily, that you can't stand seeing her happy, that you're making up lies about Grant to get attention. She's saying this is a pattern with you, that you've always caused drama and couldn't even let Lily have her wedding without making it about yourself." The manipulation was textbook Patricia. She wasn't just defending Grant, she was rewriting our entire history to support her current narrative. Every instance of my childhood difficulty was being weaponized now as evidence of inherent instability. Every time I'd tried to advocate for myself was reframed as attention-seeking. Every boundary I'd set was repositioned as proof of my vindictive nature. "She's telling Lily that if she lets you destroy this relationship, she'll regret it forever," Emma continued. "That Grant is a good man from a good family, and you're just bitter because your own life didn't turn out the way you wanted. Robert's backing her up completely, and they've brought in extended family, your Aunt Susan, your cousin Michelle, people who barely know you. Everyone's echoing the same thing, that this is typical Brooke behavior causing problems." The social pressure on Lily must have been immense. She'd spent 28 years seeking Patricia's approval, being rewarded for compliance and punished for questioning. Now she was caught between documented evidence from me and the united front of everyone she'd been conditioned to trust. 3 days after my lunch with Lily, I woke up to a text from Emma with a screenshot. Grant had posted on social media his words carefully calibrated to avoid anything legally actionable while making his target clear. When you're planning the happiest day of your life, sometimes you encounter resistance from unexpected places. It's painful when family members try to sabotage your happiness. But I'm learning that protecting the person you love means setting boundaries with toxic relationships, no matter how much it hurts. The comments were exactly what he'd engineered them to be. Friends and acquaintances who knew nothing about the real situation flooded the post with support. "So sorry you're dealing with this. Some people can't stand to see others happy. Family can be the worst sometimes. Stay strong and protect your peace." Grant was positioning himself as the victim, creating a public record that supported his narrative while painting me as the jealous family member everyone needed to protect Lily from. It was masterful manipulation, and it was working. That same afternoon, I received an email from Grant, sent with a formal tone that was clearly designed to be saved as evidence in any future legal proceeding. "Dear Brooke," it began. "I understand you may have concerns about my relationship with Lily, but spreading false information about my past is both defamatory and deeply harmful to people I care about. I've researched my legal options and consulted with an attorney. Continued interference with my relationship may result in legal action for harassment and defamation. I hope we can resolve this within the family and move forward in a spirit of mutual respect, but I will not hesitate to protect my reputation and my fiancé from further distress. I trust you'll understand the seriousness of this matter. Regards, Grant." The message was a threat wrapped in professional courtesy. He was telling me to back off or face a lawsuit while simultaneously creating documentation that he'd tried to handle things reasonably before taking legal action. He knew that even a baseless lawsuit would be expensive and time-consuming to defend against, and he was betting that threat alone would make me retreat. But what hurt most came that evening when my phone rang with Lily's number. Her voice was thick with tears, exhausted and confused. "Brooke, I don't know what to do," she said. "The wedding is in 3 weeks. Everyone, Mom, Dad, Grant's family, our cousins, everyone is telling me you're lying. That you've always been jealous of me, that you're trying to ruin this because you can't stand to see me happy." Grant showed me character references from colleagues, people who say he's trustworthy and ethical. "Mom says this is exactly how you've always been causing problems and making everything about you." She took a shaky breath, and I could hear Patricia's coaching in every word that followed. "Maybe it would be better if you just didn't come to the wedding. I can't handle this conflict anymore. I don't know what to believe, and everyone says I should trust the people who've known me my whole life, instead of the sister who barely talks to me." The line went quiet, except for her crying, waiting for my response to what felt like a final rejection. I was still holding the phone, Lily's tearful request for me not to attend echoing in my mind, when my assistant knocked on my office door at the Hartley house. "Miss Hartley, there's a woman in the lobby asking to see you. She says she's family, a Patricia Kelly." My heart rate spiked immediately. Patricia had never visited any of my properties, had never acknowledged my business success, had certainly never sought me out for a private conversation. Her presence here unannounced and uninvited meant something had shifted. She was feeling cornered. "Send her up," I said quickly, texting Daniel a heads up about what was happening. If this confrontation went badly, I wanted someone to know Patricia was here. When Patricia walked into my office, I barely recognized the woman behind the careful facade I'd known my entire life. Her composure was still intact, her clothes immaculate, her posture perfect, but there was something wild in her eyes, a desperation that made her movements too sharp, too controlled. She was holding on to her self-control by sheer force of will. She closed the door behind her with deliberate care, then turned to face me. The maternal mask she'd worn in public for 35 years simply dropped, and what remained was cold calculation and barely suppressed panic. "I don't know what game you're playing, Brooke, but it ends now." Her voice was low and hard, stripped of any pretense of affection. "You will not ruin Lily's wedding. You will not turn her against Grant. You will attend the wedding, smile for photos, and leave. That's all that's required of you." I remained seated, keeping my own voice calm and level. "I showed Lily evidence about Grant's past. Documented evidence. I didn't tell her what to do with that information. That's her choice to make." Patricia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "If you continue this campaign, I will make sure you are permanently cut off from this family. No inheritance, not that there's much for you anyway. No contact with your father, no access to Lily ever again. You'll be dead to us completely and permanently." I met her gaze steadily. "Patricia, I'm already cut off. I've been cut off since I was old enough to understand I wasn't wanted. And I don't want your inheritance. I built my own life, my own success. You have nothing to threaten me with." Her mask slipped further and something ugly showed through. "You've always been ungrateful. Always. After everything I did raising you when your real mother abandoned you, giving you a home, treating you like my own daughter, even though—" She caught herself, but not quickly enough. "Even though what?" I asked quietly. She continued as if I hadn't spoken, her words coming faster now, anger overriding caution. "I gave up my own comfort to raise you. I gave you a place in this family when I could have insisted your father send you away. I sacrificed having Lily to myself in those early years because you were always there, always reminding me of—" She stopped abruptly, her face going pale as she realized what she'd almost said. I stood slowly, my voice remaining calm even as my heart pounded. "Reminding you of what, Patricia? Of the wife my father cheated on, of the baby who died, of the lie you've been living for 28 years. The color drained completely from her face. She took an involuntary step backward, her hand reaching for the chair behind her as if she needed support. "I know about the affair." I continued, each word deliberate and clear. "I know Lily is your biological daughter, not Jennifer's. I know about Jennifer's baby who didn't survive the premature labor, the baby you replaced her with. I know my father brought your newborn home and told the world it was Jennifer's child. I know you intercepted my mother's letters for 30 years. I know everything, Patricia." She tried to rally to regain the upper hand, but her voice came out shaky. "You can't prove any of that. It's all ancient history and no one will believe—" "I have Jennifer's testimony," I interrupted. "I have Caroline's testimony. I have hospital records that don't match the official story. I have every letter you returned unopened. I have documentation, Patricia. This isn't speculation or family gossip. It's fact and you know it." Patricia's legs seemed to give out slightly and she did sit, then lowering herself into the chair with none of her usual grace. When she looked up at me, her expression had shifted from anger to calculation. She was already working through scenarios, trying to find an angle that would protect her. "If you tell Lily," she said, her voice dropping to something closer to pleading, "you'll destroy her. She'll lose her entire sense of self right before her wedding. She'll never forgive you for that. You'll be the villain in her story forever." "Maybe," I acknowledged. "But she deserves to know the truth about who she is. And you've had 28 years to tell her gently in a way she could process with support and love. You chose to maintain the lie instead. That's on you, not me." Patricia's eyes hardened again. "You wouldn't dare. You're too soft, too sentimental about your precious sister. You won't destroy her world just to hurt me." I walked around my desk and stood directly in front of her, looking down at the woman who'd spent 3 decades making me feel worthless. "Here's what's going to happen, Patricia. You are going to stop interfering with my attempt to warn Lily about Grant. You are going to let her make her own decision about this marriage with all the information available like the adult she is. You're going to stop the smear campaign, stop the family pressure, and let her think for herself." Patricia started to protest, but I held up a hand. "If you do that," I continued, "I won't reveal the parentage secret. Not now, maybe not ever, because that information belongs to Lily. She deserves to learn who her biological mother is when she's ready to process it, not when it's convenient for my purposes or yours. I won't weaponize her identity to win a family conflict. I leaned forward slightly, making sure she understood every word. But if you continue to manipulate her, if you pressure her into this marriage with Grant, if you use your lies and your influence to override her judgment and push her toward a man who will exploit her, then I will tell her everything. I'll show her the documents. I'll introduce her to Jennifer. I'll let her know exactly what kind of people raised her and why. And you won't be able to deny it or spin it or make me look like the crazy one because I have proof. Real, documented, undeniable proof. Patricia's face had gone from pale to flushed, her breathing shallow. You can't. The choice is yours, I said firmly. Back off and let Lily make her own decision, and your secret stays safe. Keep pushing, keep manipulating, keep using your position as her mother to override her judgment, and I burn your entire facade to the ground. Those are your options, Patricia. Choose wisely. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. She was shaking with rage, with fear, I couldn't tell which. For a long moment she just stared at me, and I saw her cycling through responses looking for a play that would let her maintain control. Finding none, she turned and walked to the door. Her hand was on the handle when she turned back one last time. You've always been a mistake, she said, her voice venomous. Your mother's biggest mistake was having you. Your father's biggest mistake was keeping you. And my biggest mistake was ever showing you an ounce of kindness. Then it's fortunate for both of us that you showed me so little, I replied evenly. She left without another word, pulling the door closed behind her with barely controlled force. I sat down heavily in my chair, my hands shaking now that the confrontation was over. I'd just declared war on Patricia in a way that left no room for retreat on either side. She would either back off or she would fight with everything she had. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. You okay? I was typing a response when my assistant knocked again. Miss Hartley, I'm sorry, but that woman, she's still in the lobby. She's on her phone and she seems very agitated. I pulled up the security camera feed on my computer and zoomed in on the lobby. Patricia was indeed still there, pacing in a corner, her phone pressed to her ear. Even from the grainy camera footage, I could see the rigid set of her shoulders, the sharp gestures of her free hand. And then I saw her mouth form words I could read even without audio. We need to move the wedding up. She was calling Grant. Patricia was so desperate to get this wedding completed before I could do more damage that she was willing to upend all the careful planning, all the expensive arrangements to push the timeline forward. The wedding wasn't 3 weeks away anymore. If Patricia got her way, it would happen much, much sooner. Within 24 hours of Patricia's lobby phone call, the announcement went out. I learned about it through a group email that Lily sent to all wedding guests, her words sounding rushed and slightly manic, even through the professional template language. Due to unexpected scheduling conflicts with Grant's work obligations, we're moving our wedding date up by 2 weeks. The ceremony will now take place this Saturday at the Riverside Estate. We apologize for any inconvenience and hope you can still join us for our special day. This Saturday, 7 days away. Patricia had worked fast. The vendors were already being contacted, deposits adjusted, timelines compressed. The florist, who'd had 3 weeks to prepare elaborate centerpieces, now had 7 days. The caterer had to completely reorganize their schedule. The photographer scrambled to clear a Saturday that had been booked months ago. But Patricia had money and connections, and she was clearly spending both freely to make this happen. More importantly, she'd created exactly the kind of chaos that would prevent Lily from having time to think. Emma called me that first day, her voice tight with frustration. Brooke, I don't know if you've heard, but the wedding's been moved up. Lily's completely overwhelmed. We've been running around trying to adjust everything, dress fittings, hair appointments, finalizing seating charts. She barely has time to sleep, let alone process anything. Patricia's got her on a minute-by-minute schedule, and every time Lily tries to slow down or ask questions, Patricia reminds her that there's no time, that everything needs to be done now. How is Lily handling it? I asked. Emma hesitated. Honestly, she looks exhausted. And scared. But Grant's been really supportive, at least that's how it looks. He keeps telling her that he just wants to be married to her, that the sooner the better, that all this family drama makes him want to start their life together now, away from all the noise. The manipulation was textbook. Create urgency, frame the rushed timeline as romantic eagerness rather than tactical necessity, and position the marriage as an escape from conflict, rather than what it really was, a way to lock Lily in before she had time to reconsider. She agreed to it, Emma continued. She told me yesterday that once the wedding is over, everything will calm down and all the stress and conflict will be behind her. She's convinced herself that getting married quickly is the solution to all the family tension. That night, I sat down with Daniel and Margaret in their farmhouse kitchen, the same place where we'd reviewed Grant's investigator report weeks ago. The wedding was now 7 days away, and we had to make decisions fast. "We're out of time for subtle intervention," I said, stating the obvious. "Patricia's moved the timeline up specifically to prevent me from having more opportunities to reach Lily." Margaret's expression was grim. "So what do we do? We can't force her not to marry him." "No," I agreed. "We can't. And if we tried, if we made a scene, if we publicly revealed the family secret to stop this wedding, we'd be proving Patricia's narrative right. That I'm destructive, attention-seeking, willing to burn everything down to get my way. That's not who I want to be, and it's not what Lily needs." Daniel leaned forward. "So we let it happen. We create opportunities," I said slowly, working through the strategy as I spoke. "We don't sabotage the wedding, but we don't leave Lily without options either. I own the venue. I can ensure certain protections are in place." Over the next hour, we mapped out a plan. Margaret's attorney would be present at the venue with complete documentation of Grant's past, the broken engagements, the financial manipulation, the pattern of targeting wealthy families. If Lily showed any hesitation, any sign that she wanted a way out, he'd be ready to present evidence one final time. Not to force her decision, but to ensure she had information if she sought it. I would use my ownership of the Riverside estate to establish quiet safeguards. The security staff would be briefed on the situation, not with details, but with instructions to watch Grant carefully and intervene if he became aggressive or coercive toward Lily. The owner's suite, usually reserved for wedding parties, would be kept available as a private space where Lily could retreat if she needed time away from the pressure and chaos to think clearly. "We create the conditions for her to save herself if she chooses to," Margaret summarized. "But we don't make the choice for her." It wasn't perfect. It meant accepting the very real possibility that Lily would go through with the marriage despite everything. But it was the most ethical path we could find, respecting her agency while refusing to abandon her completely. What we didn't anticipate was Grant's own tactical error. Confident that he'd successfully isolated Lily and convinced the family that I was the unstable problem, Grant became careless in his final week before the wedding. The rushed timeline, the chaos of compressed preparations, and his certainty that he'd won made him sloppy. Emma called me 3 days before the wedding, her voice shaking. "I think we need to talk. I heard something you should know about." "What happened?" I asked. "I was helping Lily with final dress alterations at the bridal shop," Emma explained. "Grant was there supposedly for moral support, but he kept stepping away to take phone calls. I went to get my purse from the waiting area, and I heard him in the hallway. He was on his phone talking to someone about business." She paused, and I could hear her taking a steadying breath. "He said, and I'm quoting here, 'The wedding's this Saturday. After that, I'll have established family access. The estranged sister is the real asset. She owns hospitality properties, including the venue where we're getting married. I've been playing the long game, building trust with the family. Once I'm married in, I can start cultivating the Brooke connection. The wife is beautiful and well-connected socially, but the sister has the actual portfolio I'm interested in." My stomach dropped. "He said all that where you could hear—" "He didn't know I was there," Emma said. "He thought he was alone in the hallway. Brooke, he called Lily, the wife, like she was a job title, not a person. And he specifically mentioned you by first name. He's been planning this. You're the target, and Lily is just the access point." "Did you tell Lily?" I asked. "I tried," Emma said, frustration evident in her voice. "But she's so overwhelmed and Patricia's been hovering constantly. Every time I tried to get Lily alone, Patricia appeared with some urgent wedding task. And when I finally got 5 minutes with her this morning and mentioned that I'd overheard Grant saying something concerning Patricia, actually interrupted us. She said I was probably stressed and misheard, and that we all needed to focus on the wedding, not on miscommunication and drama." Emma's voice hardened. "But I didn't mishear. I know exactly what I heard. And Brooke, I've been watching him more carefully since then. The way he talks to his groomsmen, the way he handles business calls, the way he interacts with Lily when he thinks no one's paying attention. You were right. He doesn't love her. This is a calculated strategy, and she's walking into it in 3 days." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of what Emma was confirming. An independent witness. Lily's closest friend. Someone with no agenda except protecting the woman she'd known since college, and she was now seeing exactly what I'd tried to warn Lily about. "Emma, I need you to be very careful," I said. "Grant is more dangerous than he looks, and Patricia is desperate to get this wedding completed. If they think you're actively working against them—" "I know," she interrupted, "but I can't stand by and watch my best friend marry someone who sees her as a business transaction. What do you need from me?" "I need you to meet with me," I told Emma, "in person as soon as possible. I want to hear exactly what Grant said word for word, and I want to understand what you've been observing. Then we'll figure out the best way to reach Lily." We met at a coffee shop equidistant from both our locations the next morning, 2 days before the wedding. Emma arrived with notes on her phone, the kind of detailed documentation a corporate attorney would instinctively keep when witnessing something potentially illegal. She'd recorded dates, times, locations, and exact quotes from the conversations she'd overheard. "I should have said something earlier," she began, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. "Lily's been so happy these past few months, and I wanted to be wrong about my instincts. I wanted to believe Grant was genuine because my friend was glowing every time she talked about him. But I can't be quiet anymore. I've been her friend for 12 years. I have to try to reach her even if she ends up hating me for it." She walked me through everything she'd observed over the past weeks. Grant's business calls that referenced leveraging the Kelly connections. His conversations with groomsmen where he casually mentioned cultivating the hospitality portfolio through family access. The phone call she'd overheard where he explicitly stated, "Once I'm in the family, the real work begins. The sister is the asset, not the wife." Emma's legal background meant she recognized the language immediately. This wasn't the casual talk of an excited groom planning his future with his bride. This was the calculated strategy of someone executing a business plan. "The way he talks about Lily when he thinks no one important is listening," Emma said, her voice tight with anger. "It's like she's a means to an end, not a person he loves, but a connection he secured. And every time I've tried to mention my concerns to her, Patricia has been there intercepting, redirecting, keeping Lily so busy and stressed that she can't process anything." We formulated a plan. Emma would approach Lily one more time, not as someone delivering a family member's accusations, but as a trusted friend sharing her own direct observations. She'd emphasize that she had no agenda except Lily's well-being, that she'd witnessed these things personally, and that Lily deserved to make this decision with complete information. Emma called me that evening, her voice shaking. "I just left Lily's apartment. I asked her to meet me under the guise of finalizing maid of honor duties, and I told her everything. I was very specific, exact quotes, exact contexts, dates and times. I told her this wasn't about family drama or Brooke's warnings anymore. This was about what I had personally seen and heard as her friend." "How did she react?" I asked. "She got very quiet," Emma said. "Emma, not defensive this time, not angry, just quiet. She asked me if I was certain about the quotes, if I could have misunderstood. I told her that as an attorney, I know the difference between miscommunication and calculated language. What Grant was saying in those phone calls was strategic planning, not love. When I left, she was just sitting there, staring at nothing. I think it's finally sinking in. The next call came just after midnight. Emma's voice was urgent, almost breathless. Lily just texted me. She found something. She went through Grant's laptop. My heart started racing. What did she find? Everything, Emma said. Files on her family, on you, detailed notes about relationship cultivation strategies and asset access timelines. Email exchanges with business contacts about the Kelly hospitality connections and your portfolio specifically. His research on you on the Riverside estate, on your father's insurance business. Grant documented his entire operation like it was a legitimate business plan. She has proof now, not just warnings from concerned people. Proof in his own words. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Lily. Can you call me, please? I called immediately. Lily's voice was eerily calm when she answered, the kind of unnatural composure that comes from shock so profound it creates a strange clarity. I found his files, she said without preamble. On his laptop. Everything you told me, everything Emma saw, it's all there, documented. He has a folder labeled Kelly Family Strategic Integration with subsections on each family member timelines for relationship milestones. Notes on how to facilitate reconciliation with estranged sister for business access. There's an email to a colleague where he called me the access point to the real assets. Her voice finally cracked. He researched you before he ever met me. He specifically chose the Riverside estate because you own it. He's been planning this for months, and I was just a tool. A pretty well-connected tool to get to you and your businesses. Lily, I started, but she kept talking. He's in the shower right now. I've been sitting here with his laptop open, reading through months of calculated strategy, and I keep thinking about every romantic gesture, every declaration of love, every moment I thought was special. And it was all scripted, all of it. She took a shuddering breath. He's going to come out of that shower in about 3 minutes, and I'm going to ask him why he really proposed to me. And I need to know, did you mean what you said, that you still love me despite everything? Yes, I said without hesitation. Always. Then I need you to be ready, she said. Because when I confront him with this, I don't know what's going to happen. But I think I'm going to need my sister. I heard water turning off in the background of her call. He's coming, she whispered. I have to go. The line went dead, and I was left sitting in my kitchen at midnight, knowing that 2 days before a wedding that had cost tens of thousands of dollars, Lily was about to confront Grant with evidence of his entire calculated deception. And I had no idea what he'd do when he realized he'd been caught. I stayed awake for the next 3 hours, phone in hand, waiting for word from Lily. Daniel found me at 2 a.m, still sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my silent phone. Nothing yet, he asked quietly. I shook my head. She was going to confront him. That was almost 3 hours ago. I don't know if no news is good news or if something's gone wrong. My phone finally rang at 2:47 a.m. Emma. It's done, she said without preamble. Lily called me an hour ago. She confronted Grant with the laptop files and he dropped the act completely. She recorded the whole conversation on her phone. I told her to do that before she started just in case. Brooke, you need to hear what he said. Emma played me the recording, Lily's voice shaking but steady. I found your files, Grant. All of them. The Kelly Family Strategic Integration folder. The emails about me being an access point. The research on Brooke you did before we even met. I need you to explain this. And Grant's response after a pause that must have lasted an eternity for Lily. Okay, yes, I researched your family. That's called due diligence, Lily. It's what smart people do before making major life decisions. And yes, I see business potential in your family connections. That's called being strategic. You wanted a husband with ambition and sophistication? Well, this is what that looks like. His tone was matter of fact, almost condescending, like he was explaining basic economics to a child. I'm not some romantic fool who proposes based on feelings alone, Grant continued on the recording. I chose you because we're compatible. You're beautiful, socially graceful, well-connected. This marriage makes strategic sense for both of us. You get a successful husband with strong prospects and financial stability. I get access to a network that will advance my career. That's not fraud. That's how modern marriages work for people who think long-term. The audacity was breathtaking. He was actually defending calculated deception as pragmatic partnership, as if commodifying a relationship was sophisticated rather than sociopathic. Then came Lily's response, and I felt my throat tighten with unexpected pride. My sister, who I barely know, who I've treated terribly because of lies I was fed my whole life, cared enough to try to protect me from you. Lily said, her voice gaining strength. She risked our relationship. She risked our family's anger. She risked being completely cut off, all to make sure I had information before making this decision. She showed me what real care looks like: uncomfortable, inconvenient, honest care. You, the man who claims to love me, have been lying and calculating from the first date. I'd rather have Brooke's uncomfortable honesty than your strategic affection any day. There was a sound on the recording, something being set down with deliberate care. I'm giving you back your ring, Lily said. The wedding is off. Pack your things and get out of my apartment. Now. Grant's voice changed then, going from condescending to cold. You're making a mistake. You'll regret this. I'll make sure everyone knows what you are: unstable, manipulated by a jealous sister from a dysfunctional family that— Do whatever you want, Lily interrupted, and there was steel in her voice now. I'm done being afraid of what people think. I'm done letting fear of judgment control my decisions. Get out, Grant. The recording ended with the sound of a door slamming. She did it, Emma said when the audio stopped. She kicked him out. The wedding's off. She's at my place now. She didn't want to be alone, and she definitely didn't want to call Patricia. Within hours, Grant did exactly what he'd threatened. His social media posts went up around 6 a.m., carefully worded for maximum sympathy. Sometimes the hardest decision is walking away from a toxic situation. I thought I was joining a family, but I've realized I was being targeted by manipulative people who saw me as a threat to their control over someone I care deeply about. I'm devastated, but I'm choosing my peace and safety. Thank you to everyone who supported us. I'm sorry it ended this way. The comments flooded in from people who didn't know the real story, offering sympathy and outrage on his behalf. But Margaret had been preparing for this exact scenario. Within 2 hours of Grant's posts, Rebecca Marsh, his second ex-fiancée, posted her own statement coordinated through Margaret's investigator. I see Grant Ashford is playing the victim again. For anyone believing his story about toxic families, I'd like to share my experience from 2018. She attached screenshots of emails showing Grant's attempts to trade her family's business information to competitors, along with a detailed timeline of his manipulation tactics. Then Claire Donovan posted his first ex-fiancée with documentation of the forged loan applications. Sophia Brenner followed with evidence of the fabricated investment scheme. Emma, using her corporate attorney credentials, posted a professional statement. As maid of honor and close friend of the bride, I have first-hand knowledge of this situation. The wedding was called off because the bride discovered documented evidence of calculated deception. Grant Ashford's claim of victimhood is contradicted by his own written records, which I personally witnessed. The family he's slandering protected their daughter from a pattern of predatory behavior. The tide of public opinion shifted violently. Grant's carefully constructed image of wronged fiancé collapsed under the weight of multiple independent testimonies. Business contacts began distancing themselves publicly, subtle at first, then more overtly as the evidence mounted. His professional network, built carefully over years of strategic relationship management, evaporated within days. On the third day after the canceled wedding, Grant's wealth management firm released a brief statement. Grant Ashford is no longer affiliated with our organization. We wish him well in his future endeavors. The corporate speak translation was clear. He'd been forced to resign to avoid being fired publicly. Grant made one final vindictive post trying to claim the ex-fiancés were coordinating a harassment campaign, but by then his credibility was destroyed. The pattern was too clear, the evidence too documented, the testimonies too consistent. Within a week, Grant Ashford had left town entirely. His social media went dark. His professional profiles disappeared. Margaret's investigator tracked him to another state where he'd taken a job in retail banking, a dramatic step down from wealth management, the only position he could secure with his now toxic reputation. The social consequences weren't as dramatic as a criminal conviction or financial ruin, but they were permanent. Grant would spend years, possibly decades, trying to rebuild a credibility he'd never fully recover. Every future relationship would be shadowed by Google searches that brought up the testimonies of 4 women. Every job application would be complicated by references that couldn't be faked. His strategy of moving cities and starting fresh wouldn't work in the age of digital records. He hadn't been destroyed spectacularly, but his trajectory had been permanently altered. The calculated predator had been exposed, and the exposure would follow him for the rest of his life. But while Grant's unraveling brought a certain grim satisfaction, it left a more complicated problem. Lily now had to face the family that had pressured her into nearly marrying him. Patricia had championed Grant, vilified me for warning Lily, and orchestrated the entire rushed timeline. Robert had backed Patricia without question. The extended family had echoed the narrative that I was the problem. Lily had to decide who she could trust now that the dust had settled. 3 days after Grant left town, Lily called me from Emma's apartment where she'd been staying. Her voice was quiet, exhausted. "I need to talk to Mom and Dad," she said. "About what happened, about why they pushed so hard for this wedding. But I don't think I can do it alone. Would you come with me?" I agreed to meet Lily at her parents' house the following afternoon. She'd called them that morning and told them she needed to have a serious conversation, that she wanted me there, and that they needed to make time. Patricia had tried to protest, but Lily had simply said, "Either we do this now with Brooke present, or I don't do it at all. Your choice." They'd agreed. When I pulled up to the house where I'd grown up, a place I hadn't entered in over 2 years, Lily was already there, sitting in her car, gathering courage. She got out when she saw me, and we stood together on the sidewalk for a moment. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "Always," I replied. We walked to the front door together, and for the first time in my memory, I felt like we were actually on the same side. Patricia answered the door, her face carefully composed but her eyes betraying her panic. She looked from me to Lily and back again, clearly trying to calculate how to control a situation that was already beyond her management. "Lily, darling, this really isn't necessary. We can discuss the wedding cancellation without—" "This isn't about the wedding," Lily interrupted, walking past her into the house. "Not really." Robert was in the living room, looking older and more defeated than I'd seen him at the pre-wedding dinner. He stood when we entered, but didn't seem to know what to do with his hands. Lily sat down on the couch and gestured for me to sit beside her. It was a deliberate choice, a physical statement about whose side she was on. Patricia remained standing, hovering near the doorway like she might need to escape. "I need you to answer a question," Lily began, her voice steady, despite the tears already forming in her eyes. "And I need the truth, not excuses or deflections. Why did you push me so hard to marry Grant? Why did you side with him over Brooke when you've known Brooke her whole life and Grant for 6 months? Patricia opened her mouth to respond, but Lily held up a hand. "And don't tell me it's because you wanted me to be happy or thought I loved him. You actively worked against Brooke's warnings. You called her a liar. You threatened to cut her off completely. You moved the wedding up by 2 weeks to prevent me from having time to think. Why were you so desperate for this wedding to happen?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Patricia looked at Robert, clearly trying to communicate something without words. Robert looked at the floor. "We thought Grant was a good match," Patricia finally said, her voice tight. "We thought Brooke was being dramatic, as she's always—" "Stop," Lily said sharply. "Stop lying to me. I found Grant's files. I know he was targeting our family for business access to Brooke's companies. I know he researched us before he ever met me. So the question isn't whether Grant was genuine. I know he wasn't. The question is why you were so determined to push this wedding through even when evidence of his manipulation was presented to you." Robert's shoulders sagged. He looked at Patricia one more time, and something passed between them, a resignation maybe, or the acknowledgement that the truth was finally going to surface, whether they wanted it to or not. "Because we were afraid," Robert said quietly, "of what might come out if the wedding fell apart. Afraid of scrutiny, afraid of questions being asked, afraid of old secrets being exposed." Lily went very still. I could see her processing, connecting dots she'd never had reason to question before. "What secrets?" she asked. Patricia moved quickly, sitting down and reaching for Lily's hand, but Lily pulled away. "Robert, don't." "She deserves to know," he said, and there was a weariness in his voice that suggested he'd been carrying this burden for too long. "Your mother, Patricia, and I had an affair while I was still married to Brooke's mother. The timeline was complicated. There were things that happened that we've kept private to protect you, to protect the family's reputation." He couldn't meet anyone's eyes now. "We've built a life on covering up that affair, on maintaining a certain version of events. When Brooke started asking questions, when the wedding started to unravel, we were terrified that the whole story would come out, that people would know the truth about how this family really started." Lily's face had gone pale. She looked from Robert to Patricia to me, and I could see her mind working through the implications. "Is Brooke actually my sister?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The silence was answer enough. Patricia tried desperately to salvage something. "Biologically, the situation is complicated, but we raised you both, and that's what matters. Family is about more than blood. It's about who—" "How long has Brooke known?" Lily interrupted, looking directly at me now. 3 weeks, I said quietly. "I found out 3 weeks ago." Lily's breath caught. "You knew. When you warned me about Grant, when you showed me all that evidence, when you risked Mom and Dad cutting you off completely, you knew this whole time that you could destroy them. You could have used this secret to prove why they treated you the way they did, why they favored me, why they were so desperate for the wedding to happen. You could have burned their entire story to the ground. But you didn't," she continued, tears streaming down her face now. "You protected me instead. You gave me information about Grant without weaponizing my identity. You let me make my own choice without using the biggest ammunition you had." The contrast was hitting her all at once. I'd had the nuclear option and chosen not to use it, while Patricia and Robert had manipulated and lied to protect their secrets at everyone else's expense. "I don't know how to process what you've done," Lily said, turning back to our parents. "I don't know who I am anymore or what parts of my life have been real. But I know that I've spent 28 years being taught that Brooke was the problem, the difficult one, the ungrateful daughter. And now I see that she was the truth-teller in a family of liars." She stood abruptly. "I need time away from both of you. I need to figure out who I am outside of your narratives and your secrets and your manipulation. I'm staying with Emma for now. Don't contact me unless I reach out first." Patricia tried to protest, reaching for Lily's arm, but Lily stepped back. "I mean it, Mom. Or Patricia. Or whoever you actually are to me. I need space." She walked to the door and I followed. As we stepped outside, I heard Patricia's voice behind us, sharp with desperation. "You can't just leave Lily. We're your family. We raised you. We love you." Lily turned back her hand on the doorframe. Did you just need me to play a role in the story you were telling?" She didn't wait for an answer. That evening my phone buzzed with a message from Lily. "Can we meet, just the two of us? I have questions, and I think you're the only one who'll give me honest answers." We arranged to meet the next day at a small cafe, neutral territory, just the two of us for the first time in over a decade, without family mediation or manipulation. When I arrived, Lily was already there, looking exhausted, but more clear-headed than I'd seen her in weeks. She'd been staying with Emma, processing the rubble of her former life, trying to figure out who she was when she wasn't performing the role Patricia had written for her. I sat down across from her, and for a moment we just looked at each other, two women who shared a childhood, but not a mother who'd been kept apart by lies neither of us had chosen. Then Lily asked the question I'd been expecting and dreading in equal measure. "Tell me about our real mother." I took a breath, looking at my half-sister across the cafe table, and made a decision about honesty. She'd asked for the truth, and she deserved all of it, not a sanitized version designed to protect her feelings. "Our mother's name is Jennifer," I began. "She was Dad's first wife. They were happy in the beginning, really happy. When she got pregnant with me, they were over the moon. I was wanted, loved, planned for. When I was 4, Jennifer got pregnant again with a girl. They'd already started preparing the nursery." I watched Lily's face as I continued, saw her processing each detail. At 7 months, Jennifer went into premature labor. The baby didn't survive. While Jennifer was still in the hospital, still grieving, she discovered that Dad had been having an affair with his secretary, Patricia. And Patricia was also pregnant. Lily's hand went to her mouth, but I kept going because stopping would make it harder to start again. Dad was terrified of scandal, of being known as the man who destroyed 2 families, so he made a decision that I still can't fully comprehend. He told everyone that Jennifer's baby had survived, that she'd been born healthy. He brought home Patricia's newborn you and told the world you were Jennifer's daughter. The death of the actual baby was buried in hospital records. Patricia moved in as the nanny, then the stepmother, then the official mother after the divorce. I pulled out the folder Carolyn had given me weeks ago, the one I'd been carrying since then, knowing this moment would come. I spread the letters across the table, decades of returned correspondence, all marked, "Refused by guardian," in Patricia's handwriting. "Jennifer tried to contact me," I said quietly. "At ages 8, 13, 16, 18, 21. Birthday cards, letters telling me she loved me. Patricia intercepted every single one. I only learned this truth 2 weeks ago. I spent 30 years thinking my mother abandoned me, that I wasn't worth staying for. Finding out she was kept away, that she tried to reach me, it changed everything I believed about myself." Lily picked up one of the letters with shaking hands, reading the words Jennifer had written to a teenage Brooke, words I'd never seen until I was 35 years old. "You asked for honesty, so I'm giving it to you," I continued. "But I want you to know I didn't tell you earlier, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I thought you deserved to learn your own identity story when you were ready, not as a weapon in a family fight. I'm sorry the timing happened like this in the middle of everything with Grant. You deserved better than discovering who you are during a crisis." Lily set the letter down and sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. I watched emotions cross her face: shock, anger, grief, confusion, each one processing a different layer of the deception that had shaped her entire life. "I'm not Jennifer's daughter," she finally said, testing the words. "Patricia is my biological mother. You and I aren't full sisters. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about where I came from, about why things were the way they were, it was all a lie." "Yes," I confirmed simply. Her next question came through tears. "How could they lie to me for 28 years? How could they let me believe something so fundamentally untrue about who I am? Because telling the truth would have required them to admit what they did," I said. "The affair, the replacement baby, the cruelty of it all. It was easier to maintain the lie than face the consequences of the truth." She was quiet again, processing, and then asked more softly, "Everything makes sense now. Why Mom, why Patricia was so protective of me, why she favored me over you, why she treated you so badly." She looked up at me, her eyes red. "Did you hate me? Growing up watching me get everything while you got nothing?" I'd known this question was coming, and I'd prepared myself to answer it honestly. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Not all the time, but sometimes yes. You were a child, it wasn't your fault, but you represented everything I wasn't allowed to have. Approval, affection, belonging, a mother's unconditional love. Watching Patricia dote on you while treating me like an obligation was painful in ways I didn't have words for as a kid." I reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close. "But I never hated you for who you are, Lily. I hated the situation we were put in. We were both tools in their cover-up, just in different ways. You were the proof that Patricia's baby was legitimate, that the family story held together. I was the reminder of the wife Patricia replaced, the evidence that could unravel everything if I ever learned the truth. We were both being used. Lily wiped her eyes with a napkin, taking several shaky breaths before asking her next question. "Can I meet her, Jennifer?" "I've been meeting with her," I said. "At her sister Caroline's house. She remarried, has another son, our half-brother Marcus. He's 24, finishing grad school in marine biology. Jennifer would love to meet you, but she wants you to understand something first. She's not trying to replace Patricia as your mother. Patricia raised you. That relationship, complicated as it is real. Jennifer just wants a chance to know you if you're open to it." "I want to meet her," Lily said firmly. "I need to understand the whole story, not just Patricia's version." We talked for another hour. Lily asked about my life, the hotels I owned, the properties I'd restored, how I'd built success while keeping it hidden from the family. She asked about Daniel, about the Hartley family, about what it was like to belong somewhere without conditions. "I want to learn how to do that," she said at one point, her voice small. "I've spent my whole life performing for approval. Saying the right things, looking the right way, making the right choices, or what Patricia told me were the right choices. I don't even know what I actually want. Who I am when I'm not trying to be the perfect daughter." "That's what I had to learn too," I told her. "It takes time. It takes being willing to disappoint people while you figure out what's real and what's performance. But it's worth it." We agreed to start slowly. Regular coffee meetings, maybe once a week. No forced closeness, no pretending we were instantly best friends after a decade of estrangement. Just two women getting to know each other as adults, building something real instead of something dictated by family dynamics. As we were leaving the cafe, Lily mentioned almost casually, "I haven't told Mom and Dad I'm meeting with you. They'd lose their minds if they knew." I stopped at the door and turned to face her. "Then maybe it's time they learned that you don't need their permission to make your own family." Lily looked at me for a long moment, then smiled a real smile. Maybe the first genuinely unguarded one I'd seen from her in years. "Maybe it is," she said. 3 weeks after the canceled wedding, I called Jennifer and told her Lily was ready to meet. Jennifer's voice broke over the phone, 30 years of hoping distilled into one shaky, "Really?" We arranged to meet at Caroline's house again, the same place where I'd first learned the truth. Neutral territory, away from the weight of the Kelly family home and its decades of carefully maintained lies. Lily was quiet on the drive there, staring out the window at the coastal landscape, processing what she was about to do. Meeting the biological mother she'd never known existed while the woman who'd raised her had just been revealed as a decades-long deceiver, there was no roadmap for this kind of emotional complexity. When we pulled up to Caroline's cottage, I could see Jennifer standing on the porch, wringing her hands. At 62, she looked younger than Patricia, with fewer lines of stress and bitterness etched into her face. When Lily got out of the car, Jennifer's hand went to her mouth, tears already streaming. "You look like your father," Jennifer said softly as we approached. "When he was young, before everything got complicated." Lily stood uncertainly on the walkway, not quite ready to be embraced by a stranger who was also somehow family. Jennifer seemed to understand. She stepped back, giving Lily space. "I don't expect you to see me as your mother," she said carefully. "Patricia raised you. Whatever our complicated history, whatever happened between your father and me, that relationship you have with her is real. She was there for your first steps, your first words, your school plays. I wasn't. I just want you to know that I never stopped loving your sister, and I would have loved you too if I'd been allowed to be part of your life." Caroline ushered us inside, and we sat in her living room with tea that no one really drank. The conversation was awkward at first, full of false starts and loaded silences. This wasn't a movie reunion with orchestral music and instant connection. This was messy and uncomfortable and real. But Jennifer had come prepared. She pulled out photo albums I'd seen before, pictures of my infancy of her and Robert, in what looked like genuine happiness of a young family before it all fell apart. For Lily, these were revelations. She saw a version of our father she'd never known, younger, smiling, without the weight of guilt, his arm around a wife who wasn't Patricia. "He wasn't always like this," Jennifer said quietly, looking at a photo of Robert holding baby Brooke. "Weak, I mean. Conflict avoidant. He used to have principles, boundaries. But the affair, the deception, the years of maintaining the lie, it hollowed him out. The man in these photos isn't the man who chose to replace a dead baby with his mistress's child. I don't know when he changed or if the man I married was ever really who I thought he was." It was the most nuanced perspective either of us had heard. Not Patricia's version where she was the victim of an ungrateful stepdaughter, not the family narrative where Jennifer was the unstable woman who abandoned her children. Just a complicated story where people made terrible choices and everyone paid the price. "You were wanted," Jennifer said, looking at Lily. "Maybe not by me. I never got the chance to want or not want you because I never knew you existed as Patricia's daughter. But you were wanted by your biological mother, even if the circumstances of your birth were tangled up in deception. That's not your fault. None of this is your fault." A door opened from the back of the house and a young man walked in carrying grocery bags. He was tall, sun-bronzed with Jennifer's eyes, and an easy smile that faltered slightly when he saw Lily and me sitting in the living room. "Marcus," Jennifer said warmly, "these are your sisters, Brooke and Lily." Marcus set down the groceries and wiped his hands on his jeans, suddenly looking younger than his 24 years. "Hi," he said a little awkwardly. "I've known about you guys my whole life. It's weird to actually meet you." Over the next hour, as Marcus settled into the room and Caroline served an actual lunch instead of ceremonial tea, the atmosphere shifted from heavy reunion to something almost normal. Marcus was a marine biology graduate student currently researching coral reef resilience. He talked about his work with genuine enthusiasm, completely unaware of how refreshing it was to hear someone in our family talk about something other than secrets and social standing. "He's so normal," Lily whispered to me when Marcus stepped outside to take a phone call from his research supervisor. "Like he just exists without all this weight. No performance, no calculation. Just a regular person living his life." "That's what family is supposed to be," I whispered back. "That's what I found with Daniel's family. It's possible to have relationships that aren't built on lies and obligation." When it was time to leave, Lily surprised me by hugging Jennifer. It was brief and slightly stiff, but it was genuine. "Can I come back?" Lily asked. "Not to replace anything, just to know you." Jennifer's face crumpled with relief and joy. "Anytime you want," she said. "No pressure, no expectations. You get to define what this relationship looks like. If you want weekly visits, we'll do that. If you want once a month or just holidays or occasional phone calls, that's fine too. This is your choice, Lily. It's always been your choice, even though you didn't know that until now." This philosophy that family relationships could be defined by the people in them, not by blood obligation or social convention, was revolutionary to both of us. We'd spent our lives believing family was something fixed, something you endured whether it was healthy or not. But Jennifer was offering something different, family as a choice, as something you built intentionally with people who respected your autonomy. On the drive home, Lily was quieter than before, but it was a different kind of quiet. Thoughtful rather than anxious. "I think I want to keep seeing her," she said eventually. "And Marcus. Maybe have him visit us sometime, show him the city. Is that weird? To want a relationship with the family I didn't know I had while I'm still processing everything with the family that raised me." "It's not weird," I assured her. "You're allowed to want multiple things at once. You're allowed to be angry at Patricia and Robert while still having moments of missing them. You're allowed to build new relationships while grieving old ones." She nodded, then asked the question I'd been expecting. "Do you think you'll ever forgive Mom and Dad?" I took my time answering, wanting to be honest rather than comforting. "I don't know if forgiveness is the goal," I said finally. "Maybe the goal is just living well without needing anything from them. Not their approval, not their acknowledgement of wrongdoing, not their apology. Just building a life so full and genuine that their opinion becomes irrelevant. Lily considered this watching the landscape pass by the window. I think I need to figure out who I am before I can decide what kind of relationship I want with them, she said. Right now, I don't even know what's real and what's performance. That's fair, I said. Take all the time you need. 6 months after the wedding that never happened, I learned through Emma that Grant Ashford had resurfaced not in our city, but 3 states away, working at a retail banking branch. The man who'd once managed portfolios for high-net-worth clients was now processing small business loans and opening checking accounts. It wasn't a dramatic fall, he wasn't homeless or destitute, but his entire trajectory had been permanently altered. Emma had heard through her professional network that Grant had applied to 7 different wealth management firms in the months after the scandal. All 7 had quietly declined after conducting background checks that revealed the testimonies of 4 ex-fiancés and a documented pattern of financial manipulation. His LinkedIn profile, once carefully curated with strategic connections and impressive credentials, had been deleted. His social media presence had vanished entirely. A colleague who used to work with him ran into Grant at a banking conference. Emma told me over coffee. Said he looked older, worn down, and bitter. He spent half their conversation complaining about cancel culture and vindictive women ruining his reputation. No accountability, no reflection on his own choices. Just blame. That was Grant's real punishment, I realized. Not a single dramatic consequence, but the quiet, persistent loss of every opportunity he'd been working toward. Every job application that would now trigger questions. Every professional introduction that would be followed by Google searches revealing his history. Every attempt to rebuild credibility that would be shadowed by the testimonies of women he'd tried to exploit. He would spend years, possibly decades, trying to recover a reputation that would never fully return. And unlike his previous escapes, where he could move cities and start fresh, the digital age meant his pattern was permanently documented, searchable, undeniable. The consequences for Patricia and Robert were different, but no less permanent. I learned about their social erosion not through deliberate investigation, but through the natural circulation of information in their community. Margaret's network had done exactly what she'd promised, not spreading gossip, but simply letting the right people know in the right way that the Kelly family situation had complications. Business associates of my father's began quietly moving their insurance needs to other brokers, not with dramatic announcements, but with the kind of subtle distancing that happens when trust erodes. Robert noticed, I'm sure, but there was nothing overt enough to confront. Patricia's decline was more visible to those who knew where to look. She'd held leadership positions in 3 different social organizations: the Garden Club, the Historical Society, the Arts Foundation Board. When elections came around that fall, none of her positions were renewed. The rejections were polite, framed as making room for new perspectives and rotating leadership. But the message was clear. She was being quietly edged out of the inner circles she'd spent decades cultivating. Their Christmas card list, I heard through a distant cousin, had shrunk dramatically. People still invited them to events social convention required it, but they were no longer part of the intimate dinner parties, the advanced planning committees, the trusted inner circles where real influence lived. Lily told me during one of our weekly coffee meetings that their home had become oppressively quiet. I went over for dinner last month, she said, stirring her latte absently. They barely talked to each other. Dad read the paper during the meal. Mom made conversation about the weather and neighborhood news. It was like watching 2 strangers who happened to live in the same house. The marriage hadn't ended. That would have been too dramatic, too public an admission of failure, but it had calcified into something civil and cold. Robert's guilt and Patricia's defensiveness had created an atmosphere where genuine connection was impossible. They maintained appearances, attended church together, kept up the house, but the warmth that might have once existed had been replaced by careful distance. But Patricia's real punishment, the one I understood would haunt her for the rest of her life, was the isolation of protecting lies. Lily had learned partial truth about the affair, about her biological parentage. But Patricia lived in constant fear of complete exposure. Extended family members had heard rumors after the wedding cancellation, whispers about complicated family history, but no one had full confirmation. Patricia had to police every conversation, manage every interaction, maintain exhausting vigilance to prevent the whole story from coming out. "She can't relax around anyone anymore," Lily told me one afternoon. "Even with me, especially with me. Every time we have lunch, I can see her monitoring what she says, careful not to reveal too much. She's terrified I'll ask the questions she doesn't want to answer." The easy closeness they'd once shared was gone. Lily still met Patricia for occasional lunches. She was trying to maintain some relationship with the woman who'd raised her, but the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Patricia could no longer position herself as the wise matriarch dispensing guidance. Lily now viewed her as someone who'd lied for 28 years, and that knowledge colored every interaction. "I think she's realizing that controlling the narrative cost her the real relationship," Lily said quietly. "She spent so much energy protecting her secrets and managing everyone's perception that she forgot to actually connect with me as a person. And now that I know what she is, now that I see the manipulation clearly, she can't go back and fix it." Patricia had schemed to protect and privilege the daughter she'd passed off as Robert's legitimate child. But that daughter now looked at her with wariness, instead of adoration, asked careful questions instead of accepting every answer, and built a life increasingly separate from Patricia's influence. The consequences weren't dramatic. There was no public scandal, no criminal charges, no financial ruin. But Patricia and Robert's lives had become measurably smaller, lonelier, and less fulfilling than they could have been. They'd traded genuine relationships for protected secrets, and they would live with that choice for the rest of their lives. I didn't take pleasure in their decline. I'd moved past the need for revenge. But I felt a quiet sense of justice in knowing that actions had consequences, that decades of manipulation and cruelty couldn't simply be erased because they were uncomfortable. A year after the canceled wedding, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten envelope with Patricia's familiar, precise script. It arrived at the Hartley house, my flagship hotel, addressed formally to Ms. Brooke Hartley. I stared at it for several minutes before opening it, wondering what could possibly motivate Patricia to reach out after a year of silence, after everything that had happened. Inside was a single page typed rather than handwritten, and it began, "I have had time to reflect on the events of the past year." I read Patricia's letter 3 times that first day, sitting in my office at the Hartley house, looking for something between the carefully chosen words. Some acknowledgement of specific harm. Some genuine remorse rather than self-justification. Some indication that she understood the depth and breadth of what she'd done. "I have had time to reflect on the events of the past year and the choices I made in raising you and your sister." The letter began already framing decades of systematic cruelty as mere choices. "I recognize that my actions caused you pain and that the family dynamics were not always fair." Not always fair. As if favoritism and emotional abuse were occasional lapses rather than the foundational architecture of my entire childhood. I did what I believed was necessary to protect Lily's sense of security and to maintain family stability after a difficult period. I hope you can understand that my intentions, if not my methods, came from a place of wanting to protect my family. There it was, the justification wrapped in maternal concern. She'd sacrificed my well-being to protect Lily, as if that made the cruelty noble. As if protecting family was a blanket excuse for intercepting letters, systematically undermining a child's self-worth and building an entire family structure on lies. "I would like to discuss the possibility of rebuilding some form of relationship if you're amenable." The letter was an apology in form only. Passive voice throughout careful avoidance of specific incidents, no mention of the intercepted letters from Jennifer, or the decades of favoritism, or the active cruelty disguised as discipline. Patricia wasn't reaching out because she'd had a moral reckoning. She was reaching out because social isolation was uncomfortable and Lily's distance was painful. She wanted absolution, not accountability. I'd been in therapy for 6 months by then, working through layers of childhood trauma with Dr. Reeves, a woman in her 50s, who specialized in family estrangement and complex PTSD. In our sessions, I'd learned to recognize the patterns Patricia had instilled, the reflexive self-blame, the compulsion to accommodate others' comfort at the expense of my own, the deep-seated belief that I had to earn love through performance. I brought the letter to my next session. "What do you notice about this letter?" Dr. Reeves asked after reading it. "It's not really an apology," I said. "It's a request for me to make her feel better about what she did." "And how do you feel about that?" I sat with the question, checking in with my actual feelings rather than what I thought I should feel. "Tired," I said finally. "Not angry anymore, just tired. Like she's still asking me to manage her emotions, to absolve her discomfort, to make this easier for her. Do you want to respond?" I considered it. Over the next week, I drafted several versions of responses. One was measured and diplomatic, accepting a limited relationship with clear boundaries. One was brutally honest, cataloging every specific harm and demanding genuine accountability. One simply said, "I'm not ready yet." But as I wrote and rewrote, I realized something fundamental. Patricia's letter didn't actually require my response. She was seeking absolution I wasn't obligated to provide. Responding in any form would reopen a door I'd carefully, painfully closed. It would signal availability for a relationship I no longer wanted. It would invite Patricia back into my life at a time when I was finally building something healthy without her shadow over it. I'd learned in therapy that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation. I could release the active anger, could stop wishing harm on Patricia, could even hope she found some measure of peace in her remaining years, all without inviting her back into my life. I filed the letter in a folder with other family documents and didn't respond. 2 weeks later, Lily mentioned during our coffee meeting, "Mom said she sent you a letter. Did you get it?" "I did," I said simply. Lily waited, clearly expecting me to elaborate. When I didn't, she asked carefully, "Are you going to respond?" "No," I said. "I don't think I am." Lily looked surprised, but not judgmental. "Can I ask why?" I chose my words carefully, aware that Patricia was still Lily's mother in every meaningful way, regardless of biology. Forgiveness for me doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen, or accepting a half-hearted apology that's more about her comfort than genuine change. It means I'm not carrying active anger anymore. I'm not wishing harm on her. I'm just not inviting her into my life. I took a sip of my coffee, letting that settle before continuing. "You can have whatever relationship with her works for you, Lily. She's your mother. She raised you. That relationship is real, whatever its complications. But I don't have to participate in her redemption arc. I don't have to help her feel better about the choices she made." Lily sat with this for a moment, processing. "She's been asking about you," she said quietly. "At our lunches. Whether you're doing well, if you've mentioned her, if I think you'll ever want to reconnect." "What do you tell her?" "That you seem happy," Lily said. "That you've built a good life. That I don't speak for you." She paused, then added, "It's hard navigating between you both. I don't want you to think I'm betraying you by maintaining a relationship with her." "I don't think that at all," I assured her. "You're allowed to love her, to maintain whatever relationship works for you. That doesn't require you to defend her choices or pretend she didn't do harm. Both things can be true. You can care about her and acknowledge that she hurt me deeply." Lily nodded slowly, and I could see some tension leave her shoulders. The permission to hold complexity, to not have to choose sides, absolutely seemed to ease something in her. "The letter she sent," Lily said after a moment, "was it a real apology?" "It was an apology in form," I said honestly. "But it was full of justifications and passive language. No acknowledgement of specific harm, no real accountability. It felt like she wanted me to absolve her discomfort rather than genuinely reckoning with what she did." "That sounds like her," Lily said with a sad smile. Everything is always about how things look, how they feel to her, whether she can maintain the narrative she wants. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us processing our complicated relationships with the woman who'd shaped so much of our lives. "Do you think she'll ever really understand what she did wrong?" Lily asked finally. I considered the question seriously, thinking about Patricia, as I'd last seen her defensive, desperate to maintain control, unable to acknowledge truth without layers of justification protecting her from the full weight of it. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I've stopped needing her to." That Sunday I went to Margaret's for dinner, as I'd been doing almost weekly since marrying Daniel. These gatherings had become a touchstone for me, a reminder of what family could look like when it wasn't built on secrets and manipulation. The farmhouse kitchen was warm and chaotic in the best way, Margaret coordinating multiple dishes, while Daniel's sister Karen set the table. His brother Tom arguing good-naturedly with their Aunt Ruth about whether the county needed to expand the community center. This was the Hartley family in their natural state, loud, opinionated, deeply connected. What struck me most, even after 6 years of marriage, was how disagreement functioned in this family. When Tom criticized Daniel's decision to expand into organic certification for the farm, saying it was too expensive and too much hassle, no one gasped or changed the subject or tried to smooth things over. Daniel simply responded, "I hear your concerns about cost. Let me show you the projections I'm working with." And they spent 15 minutes discussing margins and market demand while Margaret passed around roasted vegetables and Karen offered her perspective as someone who worked in agricultural policy. The disagreement was direct, substantive, and completely without the undercurrent of threat that had saturated every conflict in my childhood. Tom could criticize Daniel's business decision without it meaning he didn't love his brother. Daniel could defend his choice without it being seen as disrespectful to Tom's experience. And when they reached an impasse, Tom still skeptical, Daniel still convinced, they simply agreed to revisit the conversation in 6 months when Daniel had more data. No one's worth was questioned. No one was punished with silence or passive aggression. It was just family working through a legitimate difference of opinion. Later in the meal, Margaret asked about my recent property acquisition, a small historic inn 2 counties over that I was planning to restore. She wanted details about the architectural features, the timeline, the vision I had for it. The whole table leaned in, genuinely interested, asking questions that showed they'd been paying attention to my work all along. "Your eye for these properties is remarkable," Karen said. "You see potential where other people just see problems." There was no jealousy in her voice, no subtle competition. When I'd announced my first hotel acquisition years ago, the Kelly family had barely acknowledged it. Here, the Hartleys celebrated my expansion with genuine pride, asking if they could invest, offering connections to suppliers and contractors, treating my success as a family victory rather than a threat. "You should bring Lily to next Sunday's dinner," Margaret suggested as we cleared plates. "If she's comfortable with it. She's family now, too." That simple statement, "she's family now, too," carried so much weight. The Hartleys didn't require Lily to prove herself or earn her place. She was connected to me and I was connected to them, and therefore she belonged if she wanted to belong. After dinner, I found myself alone in Margaret's garden with Daniel, watching the sun set over the farmland that had been in his family for 4 generations. "I didn't know marriage could be like this," I said quietly. "Safe." Daniel turned to look at me, his expression serious. "That's what it's supposed to be, Brooke. That's the bare minimum. A partnership where you don't have to perform or prove yourself, where support doesn't come with conditions." Throughout the entire ordeal with Grant and my birth family, Daniel had been exactly that kind of partner. He'd provided resources when I needed them, his mother's connections, access to investigators' legal support, but he'd never tried to control my decisions. He'd offered perspective when I asked for it, but he'd never pressured me toward a particular outcome. He'd never said, "I told you so," about my family's behavior, even though he'd recognized their toxicity years before I'd been ready to fully face it. He'd never demanded I cut them off, and he'd never pushed me to reconcile. He'd simply stood beside me, held me when I cried, and let me navigate my own path at my own pace. My whole childhood love meant obedience, I said. If I wanted approval, I had to diminish myself, agree with everything, never cause problems. Your family taught me that real love looks completely different. Your family taught you wrong, Daniel said simply. And I'm glad you're learning what right looks like. A few weeks later, I made a decision that felt both practical and deeply symbolic. I met with my attorney to update my will and estate documents. I had no children, but I needed designated decision-makers for medical and financial matters if something happened to me. I'd like Daniel as primary, I told the attorney, and Margaret Hartley as secondary decision-maker. When the documents were drafted, I asked Margaret if we could talk privately. We sat in her living room, the same place where she'd first shown me Grant's investigator report, the same place where so many important family decisions had been made over the years. I've updated my will, I said, and I wanted to ask formally if you'd be willing to be named as a guardian and decision-maker. Not that I'm planning on anything happening, but legally I need someone designated. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She reached across and took my hand. You don't have to ask, sweetheart. You became my daughter the day Daniel married you. That's how this family works. Once you're in completely. The certainty in her voice, the absolute lack of conditions or qualifications broke something open in me. I'd spent 35 years not quite belonging anywhere, always aware that my place in my birth family was tentative, conditional, revocable. Here I belonged, fully, without question. I'd like to start bringing Lily to Sunday dinners, I said. If that's okay? She's trying to figure out what healthy family looks like, and I think seeing your family might help. Of course, Margaret said immediately. She's always welcome. Both of you are. The next Sunday, I brought Lily to the Hartley farmhouse. She was nervous, I could tell, unused to family gatherings that didn't come with performance anxiety and social calculation. But within an hour, she was helping Karen set the table while Tom teased her about her impractical city shoes, and Margaret taught her the family recipe for cornbread. On the drive home, Lily was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "They're not perfect, but they're real. They argue and disagree, but no one's love is conditional on winning the argument. Tom can criticize Daniel, and everyone still loves Tom. Margaret can correct Karen, and Karen doesn't spend the rest of dinner trying to regain approval." "That's what I've been trying to tell you," I said. "This is what family can look like." "This is what I want to build," Lily said firmly. "This kind of family, not what we grew up in." 2 weeks later, I received a call from the Regional Hospitality Association. The Hartley House had been nominated for their Excellence in Historic Preservation and Guest Experience Award. It was a prestigious recognition, one that came with significant media coverage. "We'll need to announce the finalists publicly," the coordinator explained, "which means your name will be listed as the owner in all promotional materials." My carefully maintained privacy was about to end, and Patricia would finally have proof of everything she'd dismissed. The announcement went out 3 weeks later. The Hartley House had won Best Boutique Hotel, Regional Excellence, and my name was listed in every press release, every trade publication article, every piece of promotional material. Brooke Hartley, owner and visionary behind the Hartley House, has transformed a neglected 1920s property into a destination that honors historical integrity while providing modern luxury. For years, I'd maintained careful privacy, structuring my businesses through LLCs, keeping my name off public registries, operating successfully but quietly. That privacy ended the moment the award was announced. Local news picked up the story. Hometown woman builds hospitality empire. Historic preservation meets business acumen. The kind of feel-good coverage that outlets loved. My phone started ringing with interview requests. Trade publications wanted to profile my restoration approach. The business section of the regional newspaper ran a feature with photos of the Hartley House's lobby, my office. Me standing in front of the property I'd saved from demolition and brought back to life. It was validating in ways I hadn't expected. Seeing my work recognized publicly, having my business acumen documented by objective third parties, proving on a stage beyond my family's awareness that I'd built something valuable, it felt like external confirmation of what I'd always known, but had been taught to doubt. but it also made me vulnerable in a new way. The Kelly family would now have undeniable evidence of what they'd missed, what they'd dismissed, what they'd underestimated for 35 years. Robert called 2 days after the announcement, the first direct contact I'd had from him in over a year. His voice on the phone was hesitant, almost shy. "Brooke, I saw the news about your award. Congratulations. That's really impressive." I thanked him politely, waiting to see where he was going with this. "I always knew you were capable," he continued, and I heard him trying to rewrite history in real time. "Even when you were young, you had that determination, that drive. I'm proud of what you've accomplished." The words should have meant something. Part of me, the child who desperately wanted her father's approval, felt a flutter of response. But the adult I'd become recognized this for what it was: approval offered only after success was publicly proven and impossible to deny. He hadn't believed in me when it would have mattered, when I was struggling and uncertain and building something from nothing. He was proud now that it was safe to be proud, now that my success reflected well on him. "Thank you," I said neutrally. "I appreciate you calling." The conversation lasted another 5 awkward minutes. Robert trying to find a way to express something he didn't quite have the emotional vocabulary for, me responding with polite distance. When we hung up, I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no particular emotion at all. He'd become irrelevant to my sense of self. Patricia didn't call. I learned about her reaction through Lily, who came to our weekly coffee meeting with an expression that suggested she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Mom saw the article," Lily said. "She spent our entire lunch complaining that you should have told the family about your business success, that it was disrespectful to keep it secret, that you made them look foolish by not sharing information, that families should know these things." The predictable self-centeredness of it made me laugh. Of course, Patricia would frame my privacy as a slight against her, rather than as a protective boundary I'd built, because sharing anything with the Kelly family had always resulted in minimization or weaponization. "She never once said she was proud of you," Lily continued. "Never acknowledged that maybe she should have paid attention, should have asked what you were doing with your life, should have valued you enough to care. Just complaints that you didn't tell her." "That sounds exactly like her," I said, and I meant it without bitterness. I'd stopped expecting Patricia to be anything other than what she was. But what mattered more than family reaction was what happened in my professional world. The award opened doors I hadn't known existed. I received invitations to speak on hospitality industry panels about historic preservation and sustainable tourism. Boutique hotel owners from across the region reached out asking about consulting arrangements. They wanted to know how I'd achieved both historical authenticity and financial viability. Ethical investors contacted me with partnership proposals for expanding into new markets. A reporter from a hospitality trade magazine interviewed me for a feature on emerging voices in the industry. She asked thoughtful questions about my restoration philosophy, my approach to staff development, my vision for creating spaces that served communities rather than just extracting tourist dollars. Then she asked the question that made me pause. "What's your secret to success? What drives you?" I thought about giving a standard business answer: market research, strategic planning, attention to detail. But something made me tell the truth instead. I built this because I needed to prove to myself that I had value, even when the people who should have loved me couldn't see it, I said. "Every hotel I restore is a space where people belong, where they're welcomed without having to perform or prove themselves. I'm creating what I didn't have growing up, places where worth isn't conditional, where beauty is honored, where everyone who walks through the door is treated as if they matter." The interviewer's eyes had widened slightly, recognizing that there was a deeper story there, even if she didn't know the details. When the article ran, my quote was highlighted in a pull-out box. Several readers wrote to the magazine saying that answer had resonated with them, that they recognized themselves in that drive to build something, because family had failed to see their value. The award ceremony itself was held at a downtown hotel, attended by industry professionals, local business leaders, and hospitality executives. Daniel came with me steady and proud in his suit. Margaret insisted on attending, despite it being a weeknight, and Lily asked if she could come to support me. When they called my name and I walked to the stage to accept the award, I looked out at the audience and saw my chosen family in the front row. Daniel, Margaret, Lily, even Emma had come. The Kelly family was notably absent, which felt appropriate. I gave a short acceptance speech thanking my staff, acknowledging the historical significance of preservation work, noting the community partners who'd supported the restoration. Then I added one final line looking directly at my chosen family as I said it. This award represents not just business success, but the freedom that comes from building a life defined by your own standards, not someone else's limitations. The applause that followed felt like vindication. 3 years after the wedding that never happened, I stood in the lobby of my 6th property, a beautifully restored inn in Vermont that had just opened to its first guests. The Hartley House had become my flagship, a destination property featured in travel magazines and hospitality industry case studies. But each subsequent acquisition had been carefully chosen, each restoration project a labor of intentional care. I'd developed a reputation in the industry for hiring people others overlooked. My management team included a single mother who'd been out of the workforce for 8 years, a former line cook with no formal business training who'd proven brilliant at operations, and a property manager who'd spent a decade in retail before discovering a gift for hospitality. I sought out people with non-traditional backgrounds because I recognized myself in them, capable people who'd been underestimated, dismissed, or written off by those who couldn't see past surface credentials. The business side of my life had expanded beyond hotels. I served on the board of a nonprofit supporting women entrepreneurs, reviewing grant applications, and mentoring women trying to start their own businesses. I didn't publicize this work or seek recognition for it. I just quietly made myself available to people who needed someone to believe in them the way no one had believed in me when I was starting out. I'd also become an unexpected resource for people navigating family estrangement. Word spread somehow through Daniel's family network, through business connections, through the quiet circulation of information that happens in communities, that I understood what it meant to build a life separate from toxic family. People would reach out cautiously, asking if we could talk over coffee, and I'd listen to their stories and offer what perspective I could. Not preaching, not pushing my choices on them, just being present for people who needed to know they weren't alone in choosing themselves over family obligation. Daniel and I had talked seriously about children. We'd sat down multiple times over the past 3 years, considering whether we wanted to become parents. Ultimately, we'd decided we were content without them. Our life was full. The farm, my hotels, the extended Hartley family with all its nieces and nephews, the community we'd built. We had room for children if we'd wanted them, but we didn't feel incomplete without them. For the first time in my life, I was genuinely happy. Not performing happiness for an audience, not working towards some future state of contentment, not telling myself I should be grateful for what I had. I was actually authentically at peace with my life and myself. Lily's journey over those 3 years had been equally transformative, though in different ways. She'd left her nonprofit marketing position, a job she'd chosen primarily because Patricia approved of it, and went back to school for art therapy. She'd always been artistic, I learned, but had suppressed that passion because Patricia had deemed it impractical and not suitable for serious career consideration. Now she was thriving in a graduate program, discovering that she had a genuine gift for helping people process trauma through creative expression. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. She was literally learning to help people heal from the kind of damage our family had inflicted. She'd also started dating someone she'd met through grad school friends, a high school art teacher named Michael, who knew nothing about the Kelly family drama when they met. He'd simply liked Lily for who she was, without any context about her family's social standing or the canceled wedding or the complicated history. That fresh start had been healing for her. Her relationship with Patricia and Robert had settled into something civil but distant. Quarterly dinners, major holidays, birthday phone calls. When Patricia tried the old manipulation tactics, guilt trips, passive-aggressive comments, attempts to control decisions, Lily now calmly ended the conversation. She'd learned boundaries from watching me, and she'd learned that enforcing them didn't make her a bad daughter, just a healthy adult. She'd built a genuine, if slightly awkward, relationship with Jennifer and Marcus. They had dinners once a month, celebrated holidays together, maintained the kind of connection that acknowledged complexity without demanding perfection. Jennifer had been careful never to pressure Lily, never to try replacing Patricia, just to be available and honest and respectful of whatever Lily needed. Most significantly for me, Lily and I had coffee every 2 weeks without fail. We'd built a standing date that we both protected fiercely. We weren't inseparable. We had separate lives, separate friend groups, our own routines, but we were building the sibling relationship that had been stolen from us by family dysfunction. It was real, hard-won, and precious. As for the antagonists who'd set so much of this in motion, their consequences had played out exactly as Margaret predicted, not dramatically, but permanently. Emma's professional network occasionally provided updates on Grant. He was still working in retail banking in another state, still unmarried, still known in his small social circle as someone with a complicated past that people whispered about, but he refused to discuss honestly. His trajectory had never recovered. Every attempt to rebuild his reputation was hampered by the digital record of 4 women's testimonies and his own documented pattern. Patricia and Robert remained married, remained in the house where Lily and I had grown up, but their social life had never regained its previous vitality. Lily reported that Patricia had aged noticeably over the 3 years, the stress of maintaining appearances while living with secrets taking a visible physical toll. Robert had retired from the insurance agency and spent most of his time in his wood shop building furniture. No one needed filling hours with solitary hobbies. Their marriage was functional, but joyless. They attended the same church, maintained the same house, kept up appearances in public. But Lily said she'd never seen them touch affectionately, never heard them laugh together, never witnessed anything resembling genuine partnership. They occasionally saw Lily, but it was duty, not delight. Stilted conversations over quarterly dinners, polite exchanges of holiday pleasantries, the bare minimum required to maintain the appearance of family connection. They knew about my business success through news coverage and industry recognition, but we'd had no direct contact since Robert's awkward congratulatory phone call 3 years ago. The consequences for their decades of manipulation and cruelty weren't dramatic. No public scandal, no financial ruin, no moral epiphany that led to transformation. Just lives that had become measurably smaller, lonelier, and less fulfilling than they could have been. They lived with the permanent loss of both daughters' genuine affection, a consequence that could never be undone, no matter how much time passed. I was in my office at the Hartley house reviewing expansion proposals for a potential 7th property when my assistant brought in the day's mail. Among the business correspondence was a handwritten envelope, my name and address in my father's distinctive script. Not Patricia's controlled cursive, but Robert's slightly shaky handwriting. I opened it carefully, and the letter inside was different from anything I'd received from either parent before. It was handwritten, not typed. Personal, not formal. And it began, "Dear Brooke, I need to tell you the truth about something I should have said 30 years ago." I read Robert's letter 3 times, sitting at my desk, while the late afternoon sun streamed through my office windows. His handwriting was shakier than I remembered, the words sometimes trailing off before picking up again, as if he'd had to stop and gather courage to continue. "I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for a relationship," he wrote. "I'm writing because I need you to know that I understand what I did. I was a coward. I let Patricia control the family narrative because it was easier than confronting my own guilt. I let you suffer for my mistakes. I stood by while you were erased from your own family." The letter continued, unflinching in its honesty. "I can't change the past. I can't undo 30 years of choosing comfort over courage, of letting you carry the weight of our secrets, of treating you like you were the problem when you were never anything but a reminder of my failures. You deserved a father who protected you. I failed completely." There were no excuses, no justifications, no attempts to minimize the damage, just accountability, stark and simple. "I'm proud of what you've built," he concluded. and I'm sorry I couldn't see your worth when it would have mattered. You owe me nothing. I just needed you to know that I know." I sat with the letter for a long time, feeling something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly. The damage was too deep, too foundational to my sense of self to simply dissolve, because he'd finally acknowledged it. But I felt a kind of release, a loosening of something I'd been carrying without fully realizing it. He finally saw. He finally understood. And while that didn't change what had happened, it meant I no longer had to wonder if I'd imagined the cruelty, if I'd been too sensitive, if I'd somehow deserved the erasure. I pulled out a piece of my personal stationery and wrote a brief response. "Thank you for acknowledging the truth. I hope you find peace." I signed it simply, Brooke, and mailed it the next day. I meant it sincerely. I didn't wish continued suffering on him. But I also didn't reopen the door to regular contact or suggest we try to build something now. It was too late for father-daughter relationship. We were simply two people who'd hurt each other, one through active harm, one through necessary distance, and we were choosing separate paths forward. When I showed the letter to Lily over coffee, she read it silently, then set it down with tears in her eyes. "He never wrote anything like this to me," she said quietly. "Even after everything came out, even after I moved out, he's never taken responsibility this clearly." "He hurt you differently than he hurt me," I said. "Maybe it's harder for him to face what he did to you, the daughter he tried to protect, with lies." We agreed that Robert's accountability was meaningful, but it didn't obligate us to anything. We could acknowledge his growth without participating in his life. Closure didn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looked like this polite acknowledgement that everyone had caused enough pain and choosing separate paths forward. A few weeks later, I decided to host a gathering at the Hartley house. Not a formal event, just a Sunday afternoon dinner for the people who'd become my real family. I sent casual invitations, Daniel and Margaret Lily and Michael Jennifer and Marcus Emma, a few friends I'd made through business and community work. When the day came, I'd reserved the private dining room, the one with windows overlooking the restored gardens. The table was set for 15, and as people arrived, the room filled with the kind of warm, easy conversation that only happens when people genuinely like each other. Margaret and Jennifer, who'd met several times over the past years, were discussing a community theater production. Marcus was showing Daniel photos from his latest research expedition, something about coral reef resilience that had them both animated and engaged. Emma and Michael were laughing about a disastrous pottery class they'd taken together. Lily was helping me bring out dishes, and in the kitchen she said, "This feels right. All these people together. It feels like what family is supposed to be." As I looked around the room during dinner, I was struck by the realization that this was my family. Not the people who shared my blood or my history, but the people who'd chosen to love me and let me love them back. People who saw me clearly saw my wounds, my sharp edges, my guarded heart, and loved me anyway. These were people I could trust without fear. People who celebrated my success without jealousy and supported my struggles without judgment. People who'd proven through years of consistent presence that love didn't have to hurt. I thought about the girl I'd been, the daughter who was never enough, the woman who'd spent so many years believing she was fundamentally unlovable. And I recognized something profound. The family who tried to erase me had actually done me a tremendous favor. They'd forced me to build something better than what they offered. As the dinner wound down, Lily pulled me aside near the windows. The evening light was golden, casting everything in warmth. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not giving up on me. Even when I didn't deserve it, even when I treated you terribly because of lies I'd been fed, you kept trying to protect me." "You always deserved it," I said firmly. "You just didn't know it yet." She hugged me then, and it was nothing like the stiff, performative embraces of our childhood. This was real warm, the kind of hug that said we'd fought for this relationship and it was worth fighting for. Later, as Daniel and I drove home through the darkening evening, I found myself reflecting on the entire journey. From the wedding invitation that had reopened old wounds to the confrontation with Grant, to the revelation of family secrets, to the slow rebuilding of relationships on new, honest foundations. I hadn't gotten revenge in the dramatic sense. No one had been destroyed spectacularly, no public humiliation, no definitive moment of triumph over my enemies. But I'd gotten something better, a life so full and authentic that the Kelly family's approval had become completely irrelevant. Their opinion of me, their validation, their acknowledgement, none of it mattered anymore because I'd built an identity that didn't require their participation. The woman they tried to erase had become a legacy they could never claim. And in the end, that was justice enough. As we pulled into our driveway, Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand. I looked at the home we'd built together, the life we'd created, the future we were still writing. Behind me was a past I'd finally made peace with. Ahead was possibility unburdened by the need to prove anything to anyone. I paused at the door key in hand and let myself really feel it, the completeness, the peace, the bone-deep knowing that I'd become exactly who I was meant to be. I belonged to myself now, and no one could take that away. And that's Brooke's story. From the daughter who was systematically erased to the woman who built a legacy no one could deny. Her journey teaches us something profound: family isn't defined by blood obligation, but by mutual respect and unconditional love. Sometimes the greatest act of self-love is choosing to walk away from people who require you to diminish yourself to belong. Brooke didn't get dramatic revenge, but she got something far more valuable, a life so authentic and full that her family's approval became irrelevant. She proved that success isn't about destroying those who hurt you, it's about building something so beautiful they can never touch it. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? Have you built your own chosen family? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss stories about resilience, justice, and the courage to choose yourself. Your story matters and you're not alone.